everyone! Are you a Hoenn baby like me? Well, I guess I should say, are Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald the first Pokemon games you ever owned? What about Omega Ruby or Alpha Sapphire? Well, Pokemon Sapphire for the Game Boy Advance is the very first Pokemon game that I ever actually truly owned. So, needless to say, Hoenn has a very special place in my heart. However, we're not here to reminisce about my childhood. We're doing a region review. A region review of Hoenn. Yes, I'll be doing a deep dive on the region and grading it based on the criteria that I think make a good region. Is Hoenn as good as we remember? Or is nostalgia doing all of the heavy lifting on this region's enjoyability? Let's find out. I'm Sabrina, and you're watching Saffron City TV. Welcome back, everyone. Quick, before we get into this region review, let's go over a few things for a second. I swear it won't take long, all right? I promise. It'll be real quick. Just bear with me. First things first, please remember that I do not judge a region based on information not found in the games where the region being reviewed is the featured region of the game. No information from the anime, interviews, app games, or other mainline or spin-off titles will be included in this review, and if it is mentioned, it won't affect the review score. Say it with me, kids. If you cannot experience it while you are in the region itself, then the region doesn't get points for it. Hoenn will receive a score of 1 through 5 in each of these categories, half points included. Gen 3 and Gen 6 will be scored separately, and the region as a whole will receive the difference between the two scores. Also, version differences do not play a part in this review, so Pokemon that are found in one version but not the other do not affect the score of the generation as a whole. It is important to remember that I'll only be talking about the region of Hoenn. So things like Pokemon Ami, Super Training, Street Pass, and any online features will be mentioned very sparingly in this review, if at all, since they don't pertain to the Hoenn region itself. This is a region review, not an ORAS review. The same rule applies to Mega Evolution. Obviously, things like Primal Reversion will be mentioned here as they pertain to experiences related to the region itself, but Mega Evolution is a game mechanic that has no particular bearing on Hoenn as a location and will only be mentioned where necessary. Next, I've decided that the Routes, Caves, Forests, and Special Interiors category will from here on out be referred to as Routes, Natural Landmarks, and Special Interiors. Natural Landmarks will be broken up into subcategories for caves, forests, and other outdoor places of interest. Some of y'all have commented that the word I seem to be missing here is dungeons. Listen, I understand that that's the accepted term for these types of areas in a video game. But I'm sorry, I don't want to call Sprout Tower or the Bell Tower a dungeon. Maybe it's because I have a hard time separating the colloquial gaming term dungeon from actual dungeons, which are usually dark, musty places of imprisonment, and I don't like the association. Maybe that makes me a wacko, I don't know, but I just don't like it, okay? So Routes, Natural Landmarks, and Special Interiors it is. Okay, I'm done messing with that category. I swear I'm not going to change its name anymore. And though I do my best to be as factually accurate as possible, I am only one person, and mistakes are bound to happen. If I do make factual errors, please feel free to comment down below, and I will make a pinned comment with any necessary corresponding corrections. Thank y'all for being supportive and respectful. I appreciate you. Anyway, that covers all of the housekeeping matters. So, let's get into the introduction. Hoenn is the third region ever created and made its grand entry into the Pokemon world with the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and later in Pokemon Emerald. Since then, these games have been the subject of remakes, being Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which made their debut on the 3DS and included updated graphics, additional storyline elements, and arguably even more content than before. It's important to note that Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald may be referred to as Gen 3 or RSE, and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire may be referred to as ORAS or Gen 6. The categories that I will be reviewing are Region Design and Biome Diversity, town and city design and aesthetic, routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors, traversability and transportation, exploratory incentives, culture, lore, and immersion, Pokemon diversity, gym leaders, Elite Four, and trainer classes, naturally occurring phenomena, and music and sound design. Now, let's get into the review. Hoenn. Hoenn. The first region in the Pokemon world that I ever truly got to explore freely for myself with no strings attached. Those were the days. I remember gathering berries and creating my own little berry farm on Route 123, doing wheelies and bunny hopping around on my acro bike, riding the cable car up Mount Chimney, collecting soot as I dashed through the tall grass on Route 113, decorating my own little secret base, and surfing. I did a lot of surfing. We all did a lot of surfing. That's because the Hoenn map is essentially split in half, with the left half of the map being land and the right half being ocean. Hoenn is located southwest of Kanto, Johto, and Sinnoh, and was designed to be based on the main island of Kyushu in Japan. Hoenn draws inspiration from Kyushu's natural beauty, mirroring its diverse landscapes and its lush countryside, scenic coastlines, and towering mountains. There are hot springs and volcanoes in both regions, and Mount Chimney is reminiscent of Kyushu's iconic Mount Aso. You can certainly see and feel the Kyushu influence here in Hoenn. So let's kick off this review by taking a big picture look at Hoenn. Region design and biome diversity. In Hoenn, the central themes revolve around fostering harmony among nature, people, and Pokemon, as these elements strive to coexist in a delicate environmental balance. Hoenn's geography somewhat resembles the symbol of the yin-yang, with half of the region being dominated by a single large island with small bodies of water throughout, and the other half being ocean with small archipelagos and a large caldera, which is formed when a volcano erupts and then collapses in at the top to form a bit of a bowl shape, which has collected rainwater. This caldera is where Sootopolis City is located. However, in Oris, the landmass was formed 1,000 years ago when a meteorite struck the ocean in Hoenn. This crater collected rainwater similar to the Gen 3 games, but this is one of the many differences between the two generations. As a matter of fact, there are quite a few differences between them, and it is believed that the events of RSC and the events of Oris occur in two separate timelines and in two separate universes, as explained by Zinnia in the Delta episode in the post-game of Oris. I'm not going to dive too deep into that in this section, but just know that there's somewhat of an explanation as to why Gen 3 and Gen 6 have so many differences. Hoenn places a larger emphasis on its natural landscapes than its predecessors. While Kanto and Johto have a more temperate climate and leave a lot to be desired in the biome diversity department, Hoenn is quite warm and tropical and distinguishes itself by establishing and focusing on its varied ecosystems and natural beauty. This place is packed with lush grasslands, sandy coastlines, giant mountains, volcanoes, hot springs, towering waterfalls, an arid desert, a flourishing tropical rainforest, ancient caves, underwater caverns and trenches, and numerous archipelagos decorate a massive ocean for Hoenn to boast about when it comes to biome diversity. Many of the cities and towns in Hoenn lie along its coastlines, leaving much of the inland untouched by infrastructure, preserving Hoenn's glorious natural abundance. The larger landmass of Hoenn is separated into two parts by a river that runs through Route 118 and 119. The westernmost half of the island contains most of the settlements, some of which are bunched together quite closely, and some that are fairly distant from the larger cities. However, in the eastern half of the landmass, there are only two settlements, and they're very distant from the settlements in the west. The easternmost populated islands are also very distant from each other, as they are separated by the vast expanse of the ocean. This makes Hoenn seem like it has a central hub, with the remainder of the region feeling fairly rural. This region starts to feel particularly rural once you begin exploring the eastern section of Hoenn, and that's because there ain't nothing out here but ocean. But that's an intentional design choice, and it plays perfectly into Hoenn's themes. on paper, but we'll talk about that later. So for region design and biome diversity, I'd have to give Gen 3, Gen 6, and the Hoenn region overall a perfect score of 5. The region's design and layout feels very unique and thematically appropriate, and Hoenn has such a large variety of biomes that define the region flawlessly. Splitting this region in half by landmass and water is a fantastic idea as far as design choice is concerned, and meets Hoenn's themes of environmental balance perfectly. However, I'm not sure that it was executed in the water routes particularly well. I don't know about y'all, but I got pretty tired of surfing for roughly a third of this game. However, the fact that you can dive in them definitely helps to break up some of the monotony on the surface. I'll go into more detail when I cover the routes of Hoenn, but ultimately the routes' features, or lack thereof, determine the score in their own category and have no bearing on the overall region design, as I think Hoenn's overall region design itself is basically perfect. And Hoenn is absolutely perfect when it comes to biome diversity as well. I honestly don't need much to give a region a perfect score in this category. I just need the layout and the biomes to make sense, and for there to be more than like 1 or 2 biomes in the entire region, you know? I don't need every single region to contain every single biome that exists on Earth. As a matter of fact, I think some regions try to pack too many biomes into them to the point to where they don't make a ton of sense. Hoenn's identity is quite apparent in that it was specifically designed to be based on a tropical archipelago. In other words, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but not Hoenn. Hoenn does it right. Every biome in Hoenn serves to define the tropical vibe of the region and contribute to its overarching themes of natural balance. The settlements are strategically situated, whether nestled along the side of Mount Chimney, within the lush rainforest on Route 119, or along its numerous coastlines. The placement of the cities and towns reinforces the natural essence of Hoenn, allowing for the preservation of nature and further enriching the region's diverse landscapes. The only thing that made me kinda hesitate to give Hoenn a perfect 5 for this category is that the oceanic half of the region just isn't very exciting to experience, but I've decided not to dock points for that in this category. It'll absolutely be addressed when I discuss the routes though, and I'll also talk about this issue in the Hoenn region repair video. In theory, splitting Hoenn in half is a perfect design concept, so it gets credit for that in this category. Hoenn's region design and biome diversity are absolutely fantastic, and I'd argue virtually ideal. Hoenn deserves every single point of its perfect score of 5 in this category. Okay, moving on to the next one. Town and city design and aesthetic. The cities and towns in Hoenn never give the impression that they're imposing upon or disrupting their natural surroundings. Instead, they often complement the environment, either by being nestled within the landscape or by incorporating natural elements into their design. And this aligns with the overall theme of balance and coexistence with nature that is prevalent throughout the Hoenn region. The cities and towns make it evident that Hoenn's human population respects and aims to preserve the diverse ecosystems that surround them. There really aren't a ton of gigantic cities, and I would say that the largest ones would be Lily Cove, Slateport, and Rustboro, though you could throw Mauville into the mix in Orus. Some towns and cities are full of excitement and things to do, while others are kind of left without much intrigue. I had the same issue with Johto, but it's a little more obvious here in Hoenn. The nomenclature of the towns and cities tend to incorporate natural themes and generally combine 2 elements that define their aesthetic. For example, Slateport. It's a port paved in slate. Fortree City, a city made of tree forts or tree houses. Sutopolis City, a settlement located within a caldera, which remember is a volcano that erupted and then collapsed to form a crater at the peak. And what do volcanoes produce? Soot. The suffix polis originates from Greek and essentially means city. So Sutopolis City's name is pretty much Soot City City when you break it down. Makes sense, right? Yeah, up until you get to Evergrande City, but you stay in timeout for now, Evergrande. I've got a bone to pick with you later. Regardless, the cities and towns of Hoenn are well placed, fitting seamlessly into their surroundings and contributing to the region's overall coherence. Little Root is described in the games as basking amid vibrant nature. This simple town is not shaded with any one hue. Little Root is where the player begins their journey, as their family recently moved here from Johto. The player's mom and the gym leader of the Petalburg City Gym, Norman, also live here, as he is the player's father. This place is also where your friendly rival and his mother and father, Professor Birch, live, as well as Birch's lab. This charming town is serene and modest, featuring small red and yellow flowers gently swaying in the breeze. Next, we're going to head north to Oldale Town, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump through Route 101. This place is described in the games as a town where the contrast between colorful flowers and deep verdant forests is most beautiful. This town is quaint, without much hustle and bustle going on. I suppose a clerk at the local Pokemart gives the player a free potion, but yeah, that's about as exciting as things get here in Oldale. Which is fine. This place kind of seems like a small rural town where people live simple lives with their families. Once we leave Oldale, we're going to travel west until we reach Petalburg City, described in the games as where people mingle with nature, and a whiff of salt is always in the air in this city, which is skirted by the ocean shore. The player's father, Norman, is the leader of the Petalburg City Gym here, and this is also where Wally, our second friendly rival, lives, though he does end up living with his uncle in Verdanturf for a little while, since the air is particularly clean there, and Wally is a bit of a sickly kid. Apart from the gym and Wally's parents' house, there really isn't much to do in this city, unfortunately. Next, we'll depart from Petalburg and head through the Petalburg Woods north to Rustboro City. This place is described in the games as the city probing the integration of nature and science, and this city is the main hub of industry in the Hoenn region, with the Devon Corporation as its beating heart. And there are some pretty interesting things going on in Rustboro. The most notable structure in the city is that of the Devon Corporation. This gigantic corporation had humble beginnings as a small company that used to mine for stones and smelt iron. Nowadays, this company produces items used for training Pokemon, and it's believed that they invented all of the new Pokeballs that made their debut with the Gen 3 games, like the Luxury, Premier, Net, Timer, Dive, Nest, and Repeat balls. The Devon Corporation has also developed a method for reviving fossils as well. The president of the company, Mr. Stone, also happens to be the father of the region's current Pokemon League champion, Steven Stone, in Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris. A man in a house near the Pokemon Center claims that he actually helped cut down trees in order to prepare the land for Rustboro's construction before it was built. This man will also give the player the HM for cut. The Pokemon Trainer School is also located here, south of the gym. And exclusive to Pokemon Emerald, a young girl named Walda lives in a house on the western side of town, and she is apparently very sick, but if you tell her caretaker a funny phrase that makes her laugh, he'll provide the player with new box wallpapers that can be used in the PC. After leaving Rustboro, we're going to head back down south to Mr. Briney's house and hitch a ride across the southern ocean to Dewford Town. Dewford Town is located on an island off the southwest coast of the mainland of Hoenn. It is described in the games as a tiny island in the blue sea, and new trends are always the rage among the inhabitants of this small island town. Dewford Town is home to Dewford Hall, where trendy slogans are all the rage. Seriously, a lone message is literally the hottest thing in cool. Wherever you're from, a lone message is the biggest thing happening, right? Or maybe it's potion festivals. I hear that's all the rage in this other dimension. Maybe we should check it out. Actually, I'm pretty sure we have something similar. I think it's called Coachella. Anyway, I'll talk about what exactly the trendy slogan is used for in these games later on. There are also NPCs here that will give the player the Old Rod and the Silk Scarf, but other than that, Dewford is just a small island town without much intrigue. Sure, there's the gym and the Pokemon Center, but there isn't even a Pokemart here. What an odd little place to be pumping out the trends of Hoenn. I would assume that the residents here would be a little distant from what's going on in the region, considering their location, but maybe they just don't have anything better to do here than try to stay as socially connected to the mainland as possible. Next, we're going to take Mr. Briny up on his offer to give us a ride east towards the beach south of Slateport. Slateport City is located on the southern coast of Hoenn and is described in the games as the port where people and Pokemon cross paths with nature. And people from many different regions gather and mingle in this bustling port city. Before Slateport was built, people would gather here due to the exceptionally clean water which allowed the inhabitants of the area to grow an abundance of food until eventually trade took over the area with its booming local markets and infrastructure was built to sustain this flourishing community. Over time, the city grew into a bustling harbor where inbound ships and boats also facilitated trade through here. There is a lighthouse at the southeastern side of the city which helps these ships enter the Slateport harbor safely. North of the lighthouse in Slateport, the construction of marine vessels, including the SS Tidal, takes place at Captain Stern's shipyard. You can explore this location to witness the process of ship construction. North of the shipyard lies the Oceanic Museum, which was built by Captain Stern to educate locals and visitors about the ocean and its depths. There are tons of exhibits here, all related to the ocean in some form, be it marine life, geography, physics, and the ships and vessels that are used all over the Pokemon world to traverse its oceans. But let's not forget, this place has a ton more to do other than just learn about ships and boats. In the western side of the city, you can visit the Slateport Market, where you can purchase, quote, unique items found nowhere else, unquote. Here you can purchase Pokemon dolls, TMs, vitamins, and secret base decorations. Exclusively in Emerald, there is a woman here who will trade the player herbal medicines and vitamins in exchange for berry powder. And in Generation 6, there's an additional merchant here who sells incense items. There's even a woman next to the man who sells vitamins that will give your Pokemon an effort ribbon if you fully EV trained your Pokemon. And if you're a diehard fan of your Pokemon, you can visit the Pokemon Fan Club located north of the Slateport Market. You might even be able to obtain a Soothe Bell from one of the members if you've developed a strong friendship between you and your Pokemon. You can even give them a nickname at the Name Raiders house. Pokemon are clearly very important to the people of Slateport City, so much so that you can visit the contest hall in the northwest of the city and showcase your Pokemon's talents to the world. I'll go into more depth about contests later on, but just know that there are a few contest hall locations in Hoenn, but the one in Slateport is the first you'll encounter on your journey. However, contests aren't available in Pokemon Emerald. Instead, battling takes center stage at the Battle Tent, where the contest hall would normally be located. Here, you can participate in battles that are set up with specific criteria, and if you are victorious in these special battles, you'll win a little reward. There's tons to explore here in Slateport, and to me, it's one of the more memorable cities in Hoenn. It really feels like a genuine port city that is proud of its origins. Next, we're going to head north and pass underneath the cycling road to Mauville City. This place is described in the games as the bright and shiny city of fun, and this large city is located in the heart of the Hoenn region, at the crossroads of its nostalgic past and new technology. Mauville is a great example of just how much was changed between RSE and ORAS, and some of the differences between the two generations are stark. In Generation 3, Mauville is home to Rydell's cycle shop, where he will give you either a mock bike or an acro bike of your choosing for free. The mock bike goes zoom zoom, and the acro bike goes doot doot. And Rydell will even allow the player to trade their mock bike for the acro bike and vice versa whenever the player feels like it. That's pretty generous, Rydell. You're doing better than the bike shop owner of Kanto. Another notable building here is the Mauville Game Corner, and this is where your life savings go to die a slow and depressing death. come here to put that gambling addiction of yours to the test. I hope you've been practicing your prayers because you're going to need them if you intend on hitting the jackpot. Actually, the slot machines in roulette are pretty fun, and I usually step in there long enough to lose 3 coins and then step right back out, but jokes aside, if you wanted to, you could hit the slots hard and win some cool prizes like polka dolls or valuable TMs like Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, Flamethrower, and Psychic. However, in order to even play the games, you'll need a coin case. A woman in the house next to the Pokemart will give you a coin case in exchange for a piece of your mail, preferably first class. I'm just kidding. She just wants some harbor mail that can be bought in Slateport City. In the house on the other side of the Pokemart lives a man who will give the player the HM4 Rock Smash. The only other place of interest in Mauville in Gen 3 is the Mauville City Gym. Watson, the founder of Mauville and the local gym leader, apparently had plans to totally reconstruct the city, but ended up scrapping the entire ordeal. However, it seems his ideas became a reality in the Gen 6 universe because in Oris, Mauville is totally different from the Gen 3 version. And these differences are pretty apparent upon simply entering the city. In Gen 6, Mauville City is now an entire 3-story indoor structure with a large atrium at the center. However, this reconstruction was done by a company named Greater Mauville Holdings, which I'll go into more detail about later. Essentially, they turned Mauville into Mallville. Get it? Because it looks like a big mall. Anyway, Mauville was intended to look kind of like Lumio City and Kalos, but it kind of just looks like, well, you know what I think it looks like. However, there is a lot more to do in Mallville now. You can still take on Watson at the local gym in the northern part of the city, and you can still secure your free bike from Rydell's Cycle Shop, but now you can zoom or doot around Hoenn in 3D. Unfortunately, the Game Corner has been closed for unknown reasons, but I think we all know why the Game Corner was closed.
No, it wasn't me. It was the one-armed man.
Laws change, countries don't want children to develop gambling addictions, all of us millennials were exposed, and now look how we turned out. Just kidding again. We're fine. Everything's fine. There's
nothing to talk about, okay?
Anyway, there really is a lot more to do here. You can visit TV Mauville, which is the station that broadcasts its news programs to the BuzzNav. There's the food court where you can order a meal and then be harassed by a series of trainers who just want to battle you and won't let you eat your food in peace. I'm just kidding. That's what you signed up for when you placed your order. Gotta read the fine print. There's the Crooner's Cafe where the bartender will give you a TM. There is a move tutor in the north of the city that will teach your starter Pokemon Grass Pledge, Water Pledge, or Fire Pledge at any level, but the southern move tutor will teach your fully evolved starter either Blast Burn, Frenzy Plant, or Hydro Cannon, but only if you've maxed out their friendship. There are move tutors for Keldeo and Meloetta here as well. In the eastern side of Mauville, you can visit the Battle Institute Hoenn and take on a series of battles in exchange for battle points or BP after you've defeated the Elite Four and Champion. There's the Inverse Battle Stop where you can take part in inverse battles, a mirror shop where the clerk will give you a reveal glass if you happen to have any of the legendary genies in your party. There's the Ritzy Ribbon Retail where you can purchase expensive freaking ribbons for your Pokemon to wear. There's the Pokemileage Center where you can exchange your Pokemiles for nifty items, and the Pokemon Reflexology Services where you can increase your friendship with your Pokemon by having them groomed here once a day. And that's only the stuff you can do indoors on the base level. The second level of Mallville is called Mauville Hills and is essentially a ritzy apartment complex. There are a ton of folks here that you can visit. Some will battle you, some will give you items, some will just chat with you, so it's worth a visit while you're here. The third floor of Mauville is outdoors and kind of seems like a little park where the residents spend their time. A few of the folks up here will give you some items if you talk with them. Whew, Mauville has a lot of stuff to do, doesn't it? I think it's got more places and activities packed into it than anywhere else in Hoenn. Next, we're gonna head west to Verdanturf Town, described in the games as the wind-swept highlands with the sweet fragrance of grass. And thanks to the prevailing wind pattern, this town is always kept clear of falling volcanic ash. This place is known for its luscious green grass that blows gently in the wind and its pure, clean, fresh air. It's why Wally moved here to his uncle's house to recover from his illness due to how clean and unpolluted the air is here. There is also a friendship rater who will tell you how friendly you are with your Pokemon. You can also visit the contest hall or the battle tent here as well, depending on the game version you're playing. At the northern part of the town is the entrance to the Rusturf Tunnel, but we'll talk about that in the next section. Verdanturf may not seem like there's much going on here, but this place feels so serene and vibrant compared to some of the earlier small towns we've talked about, and there are reasons to revisit in my opinion. Next, we're going to head north of Mauville through Fiery Path and then west towards Fall Arbor Town, which is described in the games as a farm community with small gardens and a town formed by scholars who gather to research meteorites. In this town, you can find the contest hall or battle tent, like you can in Verdanturf and Slateport. However, there's also a move reminder here who will accept heart scales in exchange for tutoring your Pokemon their own level up moves that maybe got deleted or were passed up on. This is also where Professor Cosmo lives, and he researches meteorites and in Gen 6 even has a meteorite that can change the forms of Deoxys. And there are garden beds on either side of Fall Arbor. I think that the people of Fall Arbor probably work really hard to maintain their gardens and farmland here. But outside of that, there's really not a whole lot going on here. But it just kind of seems like this sleepy little farm town in the mountains is supposed to feel that way. Next, we'll head back down the mountain to Lava Ridge Town, described in the games as an excellent place for relaxing, and a popular spot in the Hoenn region thanks to its hot springs said to cure any ailment. Lava Ridge is located at the base of Mount Chimney, and it's kind of renowned for its hot springs accessible via the back of the Pokemon Center. A lot of elderly folk really enjoy this place. One of the elderly ladies here will give the player an egg that will eventually hatch into a Wynot, and an Oris a second egg that will hatch into a Togepi. There's also a Pokemon breeder here in Oris that will sell the player Moo Moo milk on the cheap. I'm not sure where she's getting Moo Moo milk from, since I don't see this as a great place to raise Miltank, but maybe she's just Lava Ridge's own personal distributor or something. Either way, I appreciate her being here because I certainly bought a lot of them, and they proved to be pretty useful during my playthrough. There's a Pokemon herb shop here where an elderly woman sells herbal medicines and a man in the shop will give the player a charcoal for free. Finally, the player can obviously take on Flannery at the Lava Ridge Gym. Next, we're going to cross the river into the rainforest and north up to Fortree City. This place is described in the games as the treetop city that frolics with nature, and the people and Pokemon of this city follow nature's cues to rise each morning and end each day. Fortree City is the quintessential Hoenn city in my opinion. The homes in the city are literally built into the treetops and are made of the materials from the forest. They're literally tree houses. The pathways through the city are all wood and rope bridges that are only accessible by climbing the wooden ladders that lead to the treetops. Even the residents of Fortree City tend to be fit and in shape from all of the climbing necessary to traverse the city, and all work to preserve the environment around them by incorporating the town's infrastructure into the city instead of deforesting Pokemon habitats in order to build infrastructure here. Apparently, bug Pokemon really enjoy Fortree City as well, as the residents talk about them flying through their windows. And they aren't the only Pokemon that call this place home. Kecleon also live in harmony with the folks of this city and will camouflage themselves into the environment. You can purchase desks and chairs for your secret base here and take on Winona at the Four Tree City Gym. While there may not be a whole lot of reasons to revisit after purchasing everything you need for your secret base, I can't help but find myself coming back to this place for no reason at all, other than just to enjoy the music and atmosphere of this place. Next, we're going to head southeast toward Lily Cove City, which is described in the games as where the land ends and the sea begins. And this tourist destination is undergoing a revival thanks to the popularity of its Pokemon contest spectaculars. I kind of like the first description of Lily Cove because it describes this place perfectly. This coastal hilltop port city is essentially the player's introduction to the oceanic second half of Hoenn, and there's no shortage of attractions and things to do in this memorable place. Here, you can enjoy the contest hall or the battle tent, you can pay the move deleter a visit and remove some of those pesky HMs from your Pokemon's movesets, or you can pop into the Pokemon Trainer Fan Club in RSC and meet with some of your fans after defeating the Pokemon League, or if you're playing Oris, you can visit the Contest Spectacular Fan Club and foam at the mouth over Lycia. You can also book a night here at the Cove Lily Motel, and you might even get to meet some interesting characters here. You can visit the Lily Cove Harbor and hitch a ride back to Slateport, or you can set sail for other destinations depending on the game you're playing. The Lily Cove Museum, located in the northwest of the city, displays works of art, statues, and ancient artifacts. If you speak to the curator in the back of the museum, he'll take you to the second floor where he intends to exhibit more modern works of art. But the largest structure in the city is the Lily Cove department store located to the right of the museum. This place has it all. You can pretty much purchase anything you could possibly want or need. However, what sets this department store apart from the department stores of the other generations is that the fifth floor sells items you can use to decorate your secret base. You can purchase Pokédolls, mats, cushions, and posters here. This is always my favorite place to visit when I come to Lily Cove. Next, we're going to surf off the eastern beach of Lily Cove and head straight to Moss Deep City, described in the games as our slogan, Cherish Pokemon. And research is underway day and night in this city, all in the hope of understanding the distant reaches of space. Some of these in-game descriptions are definitely better than others. Upon arriving at Moss Deep, you'll notice that there is a small forest of mangroves growing on its southern beach. These trees are tolerant to salt water, loose, sandy soil conditions, and tidal shifts, making them excellent for maintaining a stable coastline and preventing substantial erosion of the land. Moss Deep City is home to divers, researchers, and the current champion of the Pokemon League, except in Emerald, Steven Stone. As a matter of fact, Moss Deep is home to many interesting characters like the Secret Base Boy who likes visiting secret bases and can even tell you where your own secret base is located. Kinda defeats the purpose of it being a secret. There's also a man in Moss Deep who has a back room that allows the player to access e-reader functionality in Gen 3 and QR codes for the secret bases of some of the game developers in Gen 6. However, if you're playing Emerald, you can access the Game Corner here in Moss Deep, where you can connect with your friends via the GBA wireless adapter and play mini-games together, but only if they have a copy of Fire Red, Leaf Green, or their own copy of Emerald. You can obviously take on Tate and Liza at the local gym, but the most important place in the city is the Moss Deep Space Center, and this is the ideal location for it given the island's stable weather patterns. Here you can learn about rockets.
What did she say?
Space travel, how many successful launches the Space Center has facilitated, and even obtain a sunstone from a man inside. The Space Center also plays a major part in the storylines of Pokemon Emerald and the Delta episode of Oris. After leaving Moss Deep, we're going to surf south and dive underwater to the depths of the ocean until we find a small opening where we'll emerge in Sootopolis City. This place is described in the games as the mystical city where history slumbers. And this city, which rises from the crater of a great meteoroid crash, can only be reached through the sea or from the sky. Earlier in the review, I discussed that in Generation 3, Sootopolis is located within a caldera, and in Generation 6, it is located in a crater caused by a meteorite crashing into the ocean. Either way, this area has been filled with rainwater, which explains why the southern side of Sootopolis is predominantly submerged in fresh water. Sootopolis kind of reminds me of Santorini in Greece, as the homes and buildings here have dome-shaped roofs and are situated along the cliffs arranged in a crescent shape. According to Bulbapedia's page on Sootopolis City, it apparently was intended to look like Santorini, and I think they pulled it off well. The important place of note in Sootopolis is the Cave of Origin, where the player will encounter either Groudon or Kyogre. There are other small things going on in the city, like some in-game trades from some competing brothers. You can receive some berries from Kiri, who, fun fact, is named after Junichi Masuda's daughter, and you can battle the gym leader here for your 8th gym badge. However, the gym leader changes depending on the version you're playing. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, the gym leader is Wallace, but in Emerald, you'll be facing off with Juan, while Wallace presides as the Regional Pokemon League champion instead of Steven Stone. But that's not the only difference between the generations. In Oris, there is a giant tree at the center of the city that was donated by AZ from the Kalos region. This tree is actually really pretty and adds some additional aesthetic flair to Sootopolis. Next, we're going to serve west until we reach Pacifidlog Town, described in the games as where the morning sun smiles upon the waters, and this town first came into being as a floating storehouse used by people living on the ocean's surface. Apparently, Pacifidlog is actually built on top of a Corsola colony. This place is entirely constructed on top of wooden rafts, and the pathways of the town consist of logs that bob up and down in the water as the player walks across them. The homes even seem to be built of logs and straw. There isn't a Pokemart here, only a Pokemon Center. All of the residents of Pacifidlog, including their ancestors, have adapted to living life on the ocean. There isn't much to do in this small town, but there are interesting folks to talk to. There's the Pokemon Fan Club chairman's younger brother, who will give the player the TM for either return or frustration, depending on the level of friendship they've developed with their Pokemon. You can also speak to an elderly man on the eastern side of town, and he will be peering out of his window while searching to see Mirage Island. On most days, he'll tell the player that he can't see Mirage Island today, but every once in a blue moon, he'll see it, and then the player can actually visit Mirage Island on that day. However, in Oris, he'll alert the player if he sees a Mirage spot, which the player can soar to on the backs of either Latios or Latios, depending on the game version. Finally, we'll depart from Pacifidlog Town and surf eastward until we see a large waterfall. After scaling it, we'll reach Evergrande City. This place is described in the games as the paradise of flowers, the sea, and Pokemon. And this city is blanketed in a profusion of colorful blooms. It plays host to the Grand Pokemon League, which is essentially the only thing to do on this island other than traversing Victory Road in order to reach the Pokemon League. People have said it before, and I'm going to parrot them here. Why is this place called a city? Some have said that maybe this place was intended to be a city, but the project was abandoned, and that's why it was left without a single house, with only the Pokemon League and a Pokemon Center here. Either way, I cannot look at Evergrande and consider it a city in any sense of the word. Maybe they should have called it Evergrande Island or something. Either way, it certainly is beautiful. The towering waterfall, the abundance of flowers, the path that leads to the Pokemon League, and even the Pokemon League itself, particularly in Oris, makes this place very easy on the eyes and aesthetically satisfying. Once you've traveled through Victory Road, you'll arrive at the Pokemon League, where you can take on the Elite Four and the champion of the region in hopes to become champion yourself. And for town and city design and aesthetic, I'd have to give Gen 3 a score of 3.5, Gen 6 a score of 4, leaving Hoenn overall with a score of 3.75. Most of Hoenn's cities and towns are so aesthetically interesting, and most of them showcase a commitment to integrating their infrastructure into the environment and excel at implementing Hoenn's themes of balance and coexistence between people, Pokemon, and nature. The most notable of which, to me, would be Fall Arbor, Lava Ridge, Fortree, Moss Deep, Sutopolis, and Pacifidlog. These locations were intentionally designed to preserve their natural surroundings and feels like they were meant to seamlessly meld into the environment without disturbing it. I'm sure that Little Root, Old Dale, Rustboro, Slateport, Mauville, Lily Cove, and Evergrande also aim to achieve the same goal, but I just feel like the aforementioned locations do it best. Either way, Hoenn truly does capitalize on its themes well, without them being shoved down our throats or taking a back seat to incongruous creative liberties. The reason that Gen 3 scored slightly above average and Gen 6 scored moderately above average is because I have issues with the cities and towns of Hoenn. If you've seen my Johto region repair video, then you'll likely know that I dislike it when interesting activities or noteworthy sites are unevenly distributed. Each city and town in the region should have its own unique highlights and provide the player with a compelling reason to revisit them. I understand that in the real world, not every place that you visit is going to have attractions and you're not likely to remember every place you've ever been to in your life, but this is a fantasy world where you can fast travel across giant swaths of land and sea and visit any place you'd like whenever you'd like. And I just don't enjoy seeing certain places monopolize the attention of the player while other locations kind of sink into oblivion. That's a hyperbolic statement, but you know what I mean. It's really upsetting to me that so many locations in Hoenn have few to no attractions or are given hardly any importance at all. And unfortunately, most of the locations that exhibit this lack of attention are the small towns of Hoenn, being Old Dale, Dewford, Verdant, Fall Arbor, Lava Ridge, and Pacifidlog. That's 6 locations out of the 16 that Hoenn has that have nothing really going on in them. Listen, I know that in the real world, generally small towns don't have a lot to do in them, but that's not an excuse for a fantasy world, or at least not in my book. You're welcome to disagree, but I really think these small towns deserve more intrigue. Pokemon centers and standard Pokemarts don't count. But some locations don't even have those, like Dewford Town and Pacifidlog that don't even have a Pokemart. That's not really a big deal, but if you're not going to even let us purchase items in these towns, at least give us something else to do. Like, yeah, you can go change the trendy phrase in Dewford, but the only purpose that serves is to change the 6 tiles that Phoebus can be caught on in Route 119. That is the only reason to even mess with it, unless you're just doing it for fun. And even those who do care about catching Phoebus often don't change the trendy phrase anyway. So why else should you ever return to Dewford? I don't know, to pass through to get to the water routes? But what about Verdanturf and Fall Arbor? They at least have the contest hall or battle tent. And yeah, that's absolutely a reason to revisit these locations if you intend to take part in them. But the battle tents are only available in Emerald, and Oris completely removes the incentive to visit the contest halls. In Ruby and Sapphire, in order to progress to the next rank in the contests, you'll have to visit each contest hall in the region in a particular order. In Oris, however, you can rise through the ranks at any single contest hall location, like in Slateport, for example. Therefore, there's never really any reason to revisit the contest halls in Verdant Turf, Fall Arbor, or Lily Cove if Slateport was your hall of choice. Lava Ridge gives you the ability to purchase medicinal herbs and moo milk in Oris, and a man in Pacific will tell you about Mirage Island or Mirage spots each day, so I suppose those are incentives to go back to those towns, but they aren't exactly compelling reasons in my opinion. Okay, I'd probably return to Lava Ridge for the moo milk, but Gen 3 doesn't give us that luxury. Honestly, the only reason Gen 6 scored a half point higher than Gen 3 in this category is due to the expansion of Mauville. But not even the other cities are safe here, and sadly, some of them lack an intrigue as well, like Sutopolis. After you've caught Groudon or Kyogre, there's no reason to revisit Sutopolis because there's nothing else to do here. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to do it, I'm gonna have to say that Four Tree City kinda suffers the same fate. Once you purchase all of the secret base decorations that are sold there, there's no reason to revisit Four Tree either. I mean, how depressing is that? Two of the most aesthetically interesting places in all of Hoenn give you no reason to return other than to just look at them. But honestly, sometimes that is reason enough to revisit. And although Gen 3 and Gen 6 didn't score perfectly in this category, they'll never be unsatisfactory in the aesthetics department for sure. Congratulations, Hoenn cities and towns. You're beautiful just the way you are. If you're wondering how I personally would change the Hoenn region to improve its score to a perfect 5, then you should stay tuned for the Hoenn Region Repair, where I go through every single category that we're going to talk about in this review and make changes to the region to get it to that perfect score of 5. You should absolutely stay tuned for that. Anyway, if you are enjoying this region review so far, why not leave me a like? And subscribe so you don't miss any of the region reviews or region repairs in the future. I'll be covering the region of Ore next. Is it Ore or Or? I never know how to pronounce this one. But yes, I'm going to be doing that one next, and then after that is Sinnoh. And if you want to be notified when the region reviews and the region repairs come out, be sure to hit that bell icon because I upload randomly for my mental health. Yes, I upload randomly, so don't miss it. Hit that bell icon. Anyway, let's get back to the next category of this review. Routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors. One thing you'll notice about Hoenn upon your initial playthrough is that this region takes its natural environments seriously. Some elements it takes more seriously than others, but you can tell that Hoenn's tropical inspirations shine through in its design. Let's start by talking about its routes. Now, I won't be deep diving into every single route, but I'll talk about them generally. Routes. The Hoenn routes begin with Route 101 and end with Route 134. And the routes provide a perfect demonstration of just how consistent Hoenn is with keeping its landmass equal in size to its oceanic half. As a matter of fact, there are 17 terrain routes and 17 water routes, which split the 34 total routes exactly in half. Hoenn boasts the largest number of water routes among all the Pokemon games, with numbered routes, and has them outnumbered by a landslide. See what I did? Okay, so let's break the routes down into two parts by covering the terrain routes first. The terrain routes in Hoenn provide a variety of activities beyond battling trainers and simply passing through to reach your destination. Many of them serve as crucial connecting points, streamlining the progression through the region as you advance in the game. For example, Route 102 connects to Route 110 by surfing east, which is inaccessible in the early game, but allows you to connect back to early game routes fairly easily later on. On your initial visit to Route 111, you'll enter through the south of the route, but won't be able to access the northern part of the route due to the harsh weather conditions in the desert. Instead, you'll need to detour west through 112, go north through the Fiery Path, exit, and head east again in order to access the rest of Route 111. However, once the player defeats Flannery and Lava Ridge and obtains the Go Goggles from their friendly rival, they can easily pass through the desert and access the entire route without a necessary detour. And after the player gets the Go Goggles, they'll be able to get to the desert simply by heading east out of Lava Ridge and hopping down some ledges on Route 112 without having to backtrack through Jagged Pass and back down the mountain in the cable car. Once the player is done visiting Meteor Falls, they can exit to the south to Route 115, and that route connects the player back to Rustboro, which is convenient for a few reasons, especially if they intend on visiting the Petalburg Gym afterwards. But if the player would rather revisit Mauville, they can easily pass through Route 116, head east through the Rusturf Tunnel if they've removed the smashable rock obstacles there, emerge in Verdanturf, and then head east through Route 117 until they've reached Mauville. And even still, if the player wants to progress through the game, they'll need to surf east on Route 118, which connects to the base of Route 123, which can also be accessed in the north between Fortree and Lily Cove City. And if you'd like to travel back from Pacific-Log to Slateport, you can easily get there by surfing west through the routes 132, 133, and 134. The interconnectedness amongst the routes, cities, and towns allows for convenient traversal and eliminates the need for extensive backtracking. This design makes Hoenn feel more open and accessible, and gives a sense of freedom and ease in exploration. In Johto, some of the interesting things to do in a route would include picking berries or apricorns. In Hoenn, not only can you harvest berries, but you can now cultivate them yourself in the soil available after gathering the berries that grew there previously. Berries can be found and cultivated on every single terrain route in Hoenn, with the exception of routes 101 and Route 113. In order to grow these berries, you'll need to obtain the whale merpale from one of the ladies at the Pretty Petal Flower Shop on Route 104. They also sell decorative plants and flowers that you can design your secret base with. And speaking of secret bases, once you get the TM for secret power on Route 111, you can climb into certain trees, large bushes, or small openings in caves and create your own little secret hideout inside them. This little exploratory incentive also adds to the intrigue of Hoenn's many routes, and they can be found all over the region in pretty much every single route with the exception of routes 101 through 109. Apart from berries and secret bases, there is ample exploration to be done using either the Mach Bike or the Acro Bike, especially on routes featuring muddy slopes and ramps accessible only with these items. You'll likely find yourself traveling back to Mauville a few times throughout your playthrough to swap out your bike so you can access these little nooks and crannies, which typically contain items to find, secret base locations, and occasionally trainers to battle. Aside from the Pretty Petal Flower Shop, Mr. Briny also lives on Route 104 and will ferry the player between Route 104, Dewford Town, and Route 109 south of Slateport City. You can leave your Pokemon at the daycare on Route 117 and gain some easy levels on them, or have your Pokemon breed. There's the Trick House on Route 110 along with the cycling road. You can take on the Winstraight family on Route 111 to the south, or rest up at a sweet elderly woman's house in the north of the route. Or you can even take a break from Route 111 and pop into Trainer Hill in Emerald and enjoy some recreational battling. You can ride the cable car up Mount Chimney on Route 112, visit the Glass Workshop on Route 113 as you collect soot while you explore, learn about fossils from the Fossil Maniac on Route 114, or stop in to check on Lynette while you're here. You can visit the Weather Institute on Route 119, check out the Ancient Tomb or Scorched Slab on Route 120, or catch some rare Pokemon at the Safari Zone on Route 121. Finally, you can even become a berry farmer on Route 123, as there are tons of spots with loamy soil to plant berries here, or you can obtain new berries from the Berry Master and his wife, who also live on this route. And that's just covering the things you can do on the terrain routes. I haven't even talked about how great they look. And boy, do Hoenn's terrain routes stand out from the routes in previous titles. Obviously, you've got your routes, which are predominantly grassland surrounded by trees or mountains with maybe a little water in them, like routes 101, 102, 103, 110, 111, excluding the desert, 112, 116, 117, 118, and 123. You'd think routes 114 and 115 would be expected to follow a similar theme, but they stand out due to the presence of Meteor Falls. This unique mountain is distinctively composed of solid white/gray rock, a material only found in abundance elsewhere in Sutopolis City. I'll talk about Meteor Falls in depth in the next section, but routes 114 and 115 stand out a little due to its presence. In Oris, these two routes are covered in craters caused by meteors striking the area, and some of these craters are notably quite large. And while 8 of these routes are somewhat aesthetically standard, the other do a great job of showcasing Hoenn's commitment to its natural environments. There's routes 114 and 115, which I previously mentioned. You've got route 113, which is covered in soot that is falling from Mount Chimney, and it falls from the sky similar to snow. There's Route 111's desert, which is obviously sandy, arid, and dry compared to the remainder of the route. And once you cross the river border on Route 118 from the left half of the mainland to the right half, and head north to Route 119, you've essentially entered Hoenn's massive rainforest. This rainforest is characterized by an abundance of trees, stormy weather, long grass, which is twice the height of standard tall grass, sizable bushes, trees substantial enough to house secret bases, and numerous puddles of water throughout the area. This rainforest spans across routes 119, 120, and arguably 121. One of the coolest things about Route 119 is that the Weather Institute is located there, and this place doesn't quite fit the definition of a special interior for the purposes of this review, and you'll have to visit this place in order to complete the storyline. So it's not exactly an exploratory incentive either, but it still feels special nonetheless. Here at the Weather Institute, scientists spend their time researching and recording the weather conditions around Hoenn. They've even created the Pokemon cast form to assist them with their weather predictions and aid their research. Once the player defeats the evil team that has taken over the Institute for a short period of time, they'll even gift the player a cast form. To my knowledge, this is the only way to obtain one in the games. Hoenn's terrain routes are packed with content, offering berries to harvest, numerous homes and interesting places to explore, hidden nooks and crannies perfect for establishing secret bases, and a tropical aesthetic charm present in at least half of them. However, I'm not sure I can say the same for its water routes. As mentioned earlier, half of Hoenn's routes consist of water routes, forming the oceanic portion of the region. These consist of routes 105 through 109 in the Southern Ocean, Route 122, and routes 124 through 134 in the East. And unfortunately, they're objectively less content-dense than the terrain routes. Most of them are linear, as in, they're arranged in a straight line. They generally contain some small beaches and some dive spots, but most of them are simply less visually impressive than the terrain routes as well. Route 105 is a straight line to 106, though it does contain the Island Cave. Route 106 contains Granite Cave north of Duford Town. Route 107 is mostly barren ocean with trainers to battle as you travel from point A to point B. There's really nothing of note here. Route 108 is much the same, except the abandoned ship in RSE or Sea Marvel in Oris is accessible in the north of the route. 109, on the other hand, is actually quite interesting. There are multiple small islands on this route that lead up to Slateport Beach, south of the city. This is the largest and most popular beach in Hoenn, with lots of trainers relaxing on the beach chairs and underneath umbrellas, soaking up the sun and enjoying their recreational time. The Seashore House is also located on the western side of the beach, and you can purchase soda pops from the vendor here. Mr. Briney also docks his boat at the south of the beach. Next is Route 122, which contains Mount Pyre, and the remainder of the water routes 124 through 134 run east of Lily Cove City and then wrap around to the east of Slateport. What's interesting about these routes is that these typically contain dive spots, where you can access the underwater portion of these routes. Route 124 is quite a large square water route that runs between Lily Cove and Moss Deep City. It contains multiple small beaches that add a little aesthetic flair to this route. There's also a house to the east where the treasure hunter lives, and he'll trade you evolutionary stones for colored shards. Route 125 is covered in islands, the largest of which houses Shoal Cave. Route 126 connects both Route 124 and 127 and encircles the volcanic island/crater containing Sutopolis City. However, this city is only accessible by diving underwater at its southern side. Route 127 connects to both 126 and 128 and has a very large dive spot that runs through the entire route. There is also a separate entrance to Marine Cave here in Emerald. There are some moderately sized islands to the east containing mangrove trees and sandy beaches, and Route 128 also contains a large circular dive spot that surrounds the entrance to the seafloor cavern, and it connects to Evergrande City as well. Route 129 contains another entrance to Marine Cave and Emerald, but otherwise is basically the same as the other routes in the area. Some dive spots, some trainers, and some islands. Route 130 is basically just like Route 129, except it runs east to west, and an RSC may contain Mirage Island. Unlike the previously mentioned water routes, Route 131 doesn't have any dive spots but does feature Sky Pillar, an important exploratory incentive that I'll cover more thoroughly later on. Routes 132, 133, and 134 lie west of Pacific Log and are quite similar to each other. They're all defined by the strong currents that run through and connect them. These currents actually prevent the player from controlling their direction, and it can be pretty fun to traverse their different pathways and kind of see where they lead. Route 134 stands apart due to it containing the sealed chamber and routing the player back to Slateport City. And that covers all of the water routes. What's odd to me about the water routes is that they aren't devoid of things to do. Only 2 out of the 17 have no intrigue at all and only serve to provide trainer battles to the player as they pass through to their destination, those being Route 107 and 130. Every other route either contains an entrance to a natural landmark, a city, a secret base, or has something small but interesting going on in it. Yet they feel barren and empty, with nothing to look at but ocean, trainers, some beaches, and rocks. Route 127 contains mangroves, which I think are really cool, but it would have been nice to see them on some of the other routes as well. These routes simply just don't feel as robust and diverse as the terrain routes, which I suppose is to be expected. I mean, they're basically just the ocean. But there aren't many trees, flowers, grass, berries, or structures that give them any visual appeal, which I find kind of disappointing. Before we move on to the next subcategory, I want to briefly mention the underwater areas accessible via dive spots. Dive spots can be found on routes 124, 126, 127, 128, and 134 in Ruby and Sapphire, in addition to routes 105 and 125 exclusively in Emerald, and routes 107, 129, and 130 in Oris. Route 129 has dive spots in Emerald as well. These underwater areas typically contain seaweed in which the player can encounter wild Pokemon. They contain hidden items, deep trenches, and access to cities and caves as well. But their main purpose is to serve as an exploratory incentive by giving the player access to parts of routes that they wouldn't normally have access to without the ability to dive in order to find items and battle trainers. Okay, that covers all of the routes. Let's move on to the next subcategory. Natural landmarks. Natural landmarks covers a few different categories like caves, forests, and other natural places of interest. There are plenty of natural landmarks around Hoenn, so let's start this category off by covering its many caves. There are so many caves in Hoenn, 19 I think, and that doesn't include the caves found in mirage spots in Oris. Do you like to go spelunking? Well, if so, Hoenn says to you, "Ask and you shall receive, my child." Some of these caves are expansive and intriguing, while others are quite small and only serve to incentivize the player to explore the region. The more notable caves of Hoenn are the Rusturf Tunnel, Granite Cave, Fiery Path, Meteor Falls, the Team Aqua/Magma Hideout near Lily Cove, the Team Magma Hideout in Jagged Pass and Emerald. There's also Shoal Cave, Seafloor Cavern, the Cave of Origin, and Victory Road. The smaller caves that don't have much in them and simply act as exploratory incentives would be a Scorched Slab, Sealed Chamber, Island Cave, Ancient Tomb, Desert Ruins, Desert Underpass, Altering Cave, Artisan Cave, Marine Cave, and Terra Cave. None of these caves even require traversal to complete the games, so I'll save their in-depth explanations for the Exploratory Incentives category, where they'll serve their main purpose and can truly shine best. But in this category, we've got 8 caves to cover. And here I was thinking Kanto had a lot of caves. Boy, was I naive. But here in Hoenn, only a few of them feel like the massive and daunting caves of Kanto. A good example of this would be Rusturf Tunnel. This man-made cave is very small with only a single floor, but it's an important cave because it connects Rustboro to Verdanturf Town, hence the name Rusturf. You'll have to progress through the game long enough to be able to use Rock Smash to break the rocks that impede the path on your initial visit, but once you do break them, you can easily travel between the two cities. This is probably the most convenient cave in the region, and you'll likely pass through it a few times during any given playthrough. Granite Cave, located north of Dewford Town, is a bit larger than Rusturf Tunnel. In RSC, this cave is pitch dark and you'll need the HM for flash if you want to see where you're going. This cave has 2 levels, and the player can explore the cave in its entirety on their initial visit, with the exception of a few areas that are only accessible with the Mach Bike. Stephen Stone is doing some research on the 2nd level, and you'll need to locate the room he's in to deliver Mr. Stone's letter to him. However, in Oris, the layout of Granite Cave has been drastically changed and now includes 3 separate levels. In Oris, it's no longer too dark to see in this cave, and you can easily traverse it without the HM for flash. And the first time you visit this cave in these games, you'll be able to deliver Mr. Stone's letter to Stephen immediately, as the room he's located in now is accessible on the base floor. This room is also a little different from the previous generation, as it now showcases an ancient mural depicting glorious paintings of either Kyogre or Groudon causing natural calamity across the land thousands of years ago. Is pretty cool looking. The area that you're able to explore upon your initial visit in Oris is actually quite small, with only the base level and mural room being accessible, as the path to the rest of the cave is being blocked by a muddy slope to the west. You can only explore the remainder of Granite Cave by returning with the Mach Bike, which allows you to ride up these slopes that are heavily present in the other rooms of the cave. Fiery Path, located within the base of Mount Chimney, is an interesting little cave, as you'll need to take this steaming hot route to progress through the game until you've received the Go Goggles in Lava Ridge. There is an exploratory incentive hidden in the back of this cave that is accessible with the HM for strength, and I find Fiery Path to be quite visually appealing, as you can tell that volcanic gases are like seeping in through the ground here, and the cave is entirely composed of reddish rock. However, the player likely won't spend much time in this cave, as it's really just a means to pass through to get from point A to point B. Meteor Falls, located on Route 114 southwest of Fall Arbor, is a very large cave with many steep waterfalls and small craters caused by meteor strikes. In Oris, this place serves as an ancestral home of the Draconid people. I personally believe that this cave is made entirely of limestone. Meteor Falls is the most visually stunning cave and personally the most memorable cave in all of Hoenn. The inside of this cave looks quite a bit different depending on the version of the games you're playing. In Ruby and Sapphire, the ground is quite sandy and the rest of the cave sports the same sandy hue, while in Emerald, this rocky cave is a light grayish purple in color. This is why I believe that this is a limestone cave, as limestone typically can be found in these two colors depending on the impurities in its composition or the lack thereof. Meteor Falls in Oris seems to take visual inspiration from its Gen 3 counterparts and is a tan/sandy color on the inside with crystal clear water throughout, which makes this cavern even more visually impressive than before. This multi-leveled cave is vast, and you'll need the HM for Waterfall in order to explore it in its entirety. And there's even some interesting exploratory incentives here too. On your initial visit, you'll need to chase after your respective villainous team, as they've stolen an important meteorite from Professor Cosmo. The next cave is located near Lily Cove City and is home to the Team Aqua or Team Magma hideout depending on the games you're playing in Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris. Exclusively in Emerald, this is where Team Aqua's hideout is located, but Team Magma's hideout is separate and located in Jagged Pass, and I'll cover it next. The player will need to visit this hideout to try and prevent either Archie or Maxie from departing on the submarine, and this cave is a bit different from others as it doesn't have any Pokemon encounters in it and is essentially just the headquarters for the evil teams. The layout is essentially the same in RSE and shares the same industrial aesthetic, with only the evil team changing between versions. However, in Oris, the aesthetic of these locations vary. In Alpha Sapphire, there's a more aquatic theme to this industrial hideout, and it is decorated with blue furniture. And in Omega Ruby, it is furnished with red decor, and the water features have been replaced by pipes full of hot lava. As a matter of fact, few rooms in this hideout have a similar layout to their Gen 3 counterparts, and this entire cave has had a visual overhaul in the Gen 6 games. Real quick, let's talk about the Team Magma hideout in Jagged Pass, which is only found in Pokemon Emerald. This place was essentially drilled into the center of Mount Chimney and is likely the biggest cave in Hoenn, with 5 different levels containing very large rooms. Unlike the Team Aqua hideout in Emerald, you can actually encounter wild Pokemon here, as this place hasn't been fully furnished like an industrial building in its interior. Instead, it's mostly a cave interior that looks similar to Fiery Path, but with real lava in it this time. And large power generators decorate this hideout, along with its many Team Magma members. This is where Groudon resides, as opposed to the seafloor cavern where Kyogre can be found slumbering. Next, let's talk about Shoal Cave, located north of Moss Deep City. This cave is optional, and the player will likely only visit this place to take advantage of its exploratory incentives, which will be covered later. This is the only place in Hoenn where you can encounter Ice-type Pokemon, with the exception of Regice. That's because this cave takes advantage of the tidal mechanics that were implemented solely for Shoal Cave. I'll go over the tidal mechanics in the naturally occurring phenomena category, but just know that the tides totally change the layout of this cavern. During high tide, the cave will be filled with water, and the player will need to surf to access the different rooms. However, at low tide, the water has drained from the cave, and the player will now be able to traverse it on foot, giving them access to the elusive ice room deep in the cave. In Oris, this room contains the ice rock, which players can use to evolve their Eevee into a Glaceon. Speaking of caves being affected by water, the seafloor cavern is entirely submerged underwater and is only accessible by diving into the ocean depths on Route 128 and entering and emerging on the inside. Unlike Shoal Cave, the player will have to traverse this cave in order to progress through the game. This is another large cavern in Hoenn, and upon your initial visit, it'll be swarmed with Team Aqua or Team Magma members. You'll also need the HMs for Strength and Rock Smash if you intend to confront their leaders in its innermost room. Archie or Maxie, conspiring with their respective teams, aim to harness the power of either the blue orb or the red orb to awaken the ancient legendary Pokemon Kyogre or Groudon from their deep slumber as part of their nefarious plans. After they've awoken, these legendary Pokemon will vacate the seafloor cavern and make their way to the Cave of Origin. The Cave of Origin is an ancient cavern located in the northern section of Sootopolis City, and this cave is said to be where life begins. Access to this cave is restricted to the public and only offered to the player in order to face off against the box art legendaries. This cave is fairly small, with only a few rooms, but it does have some interesting qualities. This cave is shrouded in mist, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to be fog or steam. I suppose it could be either, depending on the version you're playing, as both make sense depending on the legendary found at the lowest level. This particular room is also aesthetically interesting, as it holds either a small body of water or hot lava, and is adorned with either ruby or sapphire gemstones in the walls of the cave. After the player initially encounters Groudon or Kyogre in the seafloor cavern, the Pokemon will travel to this cave where the player will need to battle with these ancient monsters and restore the natural balance of the region. In Oris, Kyogre and Groudon will utilize a phenomenon known as primal reversion, which is essentially a souped-up version of Mega Evolution that is achieved when they react with either the blue or red orbs respectively, and the meteor from Meteor Falls. But in order to do so, the player will need to put on either the Aqua or Magma suit and grab onto the backs of Kyogre or Groudon as they are transported into an even deeper level of the cave where these Pokemon proceed to power up. Finally, Victory Road is located between the south of Evergrande City and the Pokemon League, and you'll need to traverse it to become champion. You'll need the HMs for Surf, Strength, and Rock Smash to get through it, but I'd also suggest having a Pokemon with Flash and Waterfall on your team too, as they make it a little easier to get through this labyrinth of a cave. There are 3 different levels in Victory Road, with many bridges, HM puzzles, and powerful trainers to overcome. In Oris, the final room of Victory Road contains grass, flowers, waterfalls, a large bridge, and a battle with Wally, and this area was such a nice surprise when I first encountered it. It's really pretty. Okay, and I believe that covers all of the caves. Whew, that's a lot of caves. I think I need a nap. Oh crap, I can't nap. I have a review to finish. Anyway, let's move on to the next type of natural landmark. So, there's only one forest in Hoenn, and that would be the Petalburg Woods. You could likely consider the rainforest on routes 119 and 120 to also be forests, but those are routes and they've already been covered, so we're just talking about Petalburg Woods in this section. Petalburg Woods lies between Petalburg and Rustboro City and essentially splits Route 104 in half. This forest is similar to many other early game forests, being defined by many trees, tall grass, and ledges. A large portion of Petalburg Woods is inaccessible to the player upon their initial visit, as it's blocked off by cut trees. Once the player is able to use the HM for Cut, they can access the other large part of the forest and obtain some hidden items. You'll also need to assist a Devon researcher in these woods who is being attacked by a Team Aqua or Magma member. Otherwise, this place is pretty typical and standard. In Oris, the Petalburg Woods got a nice visual upgrade with the addition of little specks of light that beam in through the treetops onto the forest floor, mossy logs, a small pond of water, floral bushes, and the mossy rock, which will allow the player to evolve their Eevee into a Leafeon. And this visual upgrade actually serves Petalburg Woods really well. These woods aren't too difficult to traverse, and the ledges make it easier to travel back to Petalburg from Rustboro. Alright, let's move on to the next section. This section will refer to just about any outdoor area that has its own map, but doesn't fit into the previous sections. There are quite a few of these areas in Hoenn, being Mount Chimney, Jagged Pass, Southern Island, the Safari Zone, and Mount Pyre's exterior and summit. In previous games, I considered the Safari Zone to be an exploratory incentive, and while that isn't technically wrong, I believe the Safari Zone fits better in this category as a natural landmark. Let's start off this section with Mount Chimney. This volcano is the largest in all of Hoenn and is located in the northwest of the region. Multiple important places are tied to this volcano, like Fiery Path, Routes 112 and 113, Lava Ridge, Jagged Pass, and exclusively in Emerald, the Team Magma Hideout. The soot that bellows from its top snows down on Route 113 and Jagged Pass. The peak of this volcano is only accessible by taking a ride on the cable cart located on Route 112. In Emerald, this is the home of Groudon and is where Team Magma have established their hideout. This place is highly significant to the storyline, as Archie and Maxie have come here to utilize the meteorite stolen from Meteor Falls to power the machine that can either force the volcano to fall dormant or make it become highly active in order to achieve their goals, respectively. You can also purchase lava cookies from an elderly woman here. If you'd like to get from the peak of Mount Chimney to Lava Ridge Town, you'll need to trek down Jagged Pass. This mountain trail is steep, rocky, and forested with muddy slopes and small pedestals that allow the player to travel back up to Mount Chimney's peak by using the Mach Bike or Acro Bike. The artwork of Mount Chimney depicts Jagged Pass as being quite, well, jagged, and it looks really cool from a distance. However, in the games, it feels quite linear. Southern Island is only accessible in RSC via the Eon ticket, which was a promotional event distribution that has since been discontinued. This event item allowed the player to encounter their counterpart legendary. If Latios appeared in Hoenn, then Latios would appear on Southern Island and vice versa. However, in Oris, the player will visit this island during the storyline. Latios or Latios, depending on the game version, will appear before you and Steven Stone on Route 118 and transport the two of you to Southern Island in an attempt to help its counterpart friend. The player will battle against their respective evil teams here, and once victorious, the counterpart Latios or Latios will join the player's team, and the player, along with Steven Stone, will head back to Route 118. This is the only time the player will visit Southern Island unless they obtain the Eon ticket via Street Pass. The Eon ticket in Gen 6 serves the same function as it does in the Gen 3 games. The Safari Zone in Hoenn is a Pokemon preserve and is a very memorable landmark in all of the games it appears in. In RSE, the player can take part in the Safari game after they've obtained the Pokeblock case. A Safari game costs 500 Poke to enter, and the player is given 30 Safari balls and is limited to 500 steps per session. The objective of the game is to capture as many Pokemon as you'd like within the 500 steps you're given. This was a great way to encounter Kanto and Johto Pokemon in the Hoenn games that aren't found anywhere else in the region, and it presented a fun challenge to players who partook in the game. The player won't be able to battle the Pokemon found in the Safari Zone and can only throw a Safari Ball, go near the Pokemon, or give it a Pokeblock, or run away. The Pokemon in the Safari Zone can flee at any time, so the player must be somewhat strategic with how they make their captures here, but most of the time it just boils down to luck without the use of Pokeblocks in my experience. There are even areas in the Safari Zone that are only accessible with the Mach Bike and Acro Bike. There are even some Pokeblock feeders in each area that can influence the nature of the Pokemon the player encounters in that area. I'm not going to go deep into this mechanic, but it was a fun additional use for the Pokeblocks that made playing the Safari game that much more enjoyable. However, in Oris, while the Safari Zone is still in the games, the Safari game itself has been removed. Now, the player can visit the Safari Zone without paying an entrance fee and will encounter and battle the Pokemon there like normal. South of the Safari Zone lies Mount Pyre on Route 122. If the Cave of Origin is where life is said to begin, then Mount Pyre is where life is said to end. Technically, Mount Pyre serves as both a natural landmark and a special interior, but I'll just cover both sections here. Mount Pyre is essentially a massive cemetery with tons of gravestones in both its interior and exterior. Trainers from all over the region come here to pay their respects, and ghost-type Pokemon can be found inside this structure. The interior of Mount Pyre has 6 floors and is a bit dilapidated in the Gen 3 games, as there are holes in the floor that, if stepped into, will cause the player to fall down to the previous floor. Access to the exterior portion of Mount Pyre is accessible via the base floor in these games. However, the interior has had quite the overhaul in Oris, as Mount Pyre only has 4 floors now, which are all fully intact. The entrance to Mount Pyre's exterior is accessible on the 3rd floor now, and the 4th floor of the building houses a very expensive and exquisite headstone where a wealthy family can be seen mourning. The exterior is a different story, however, as it has virtually remained the same between Gen 3 and Gen 6, only with a nice visual update to the graphics and aesthetic design in the latter games. The exterior of Mount Pyre acts as an outdoor cemetery with many headstones, tall grass, and dense fog. At the peak lives a wise elderly couple who guard the red orb and blue orb respectively. However, when the player encounters them, they're being harassed by Team Aqua or Team Magma, who have stolen one of the orbs in an attempt to wake the slumbering legendaries. Alright, that covers this section. Let's move on to the next subcategory. Special Interiors. Special interiors are what most people who are familiar with gaming would call dungeons. I already explained why I won't be referring to them in that way at the beginning of the video, but that is essentially what special interiors are. They are interior locations that contain wild Pokemon, trainers, they imply exploration, and act similarly to routes and caves, only they exist within structures. These factors delineate a special interior from a standard interior like the player's house, a gym, or a museum. And there are a few special interiors here in Hoenn, being Mirage Tower, New Mauville, the Abandoned Ship / Sea Mauville, Sky Pillar, and Mount Pyre's interior, which was covered in the previous section. Mirage Tower can be found in the desert located at the center of Route 111 and is only accessible in Pokemon Emerald. Its name stems from its tendency not to be consistently present, vanishing and reappearing as the player exits or enters the route. Mirage Tower has 4 floors, and the player will need to bring the Mach Bike with them if they intend to reach the top floor. This is because there are cracks in some of the floors, and if the player isn't moving both fast enough and precisely enough, the cracks will give way and the player will fall back down to the previous floor. They'll also need to use the HM for Rock Smash if they intend on obtaining the treasure on the top floor. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, the Root Fossil and the Claw Fossil can be found in the northeast section of the desert on Route 111, but they've been moved to the top floor of Mirage Tower and Emerald. Once the player grabs one of the fossils, the other one will disappear into the sand and the tower will permanently disappear. On the other hand, New Mauville is a permanent structure found on Route 110 south of Mauville, accessible via surfing east in the northern section of the route. Technically, New Mauville is located underneath Mauville City and serves as its power plant, and it appears that this location has become somewhat of a safety hazard. Watson, the city's gym leader, will request the player's assistance in shutting down the generator located within New Mauville and will give the player the basement key necessary to enter the structure. In RSC, New Mauville has a decently sized layout and is covered in moving boxes, desks, shelves, large equipment, and power switches that will activate certain doors if stepped on. Turns out, New Mauville was supposed to be an entire underground city, but the project was abandoned when people realized the Pokemon had begun to make their homes there. In Oris, the layout of New Mauville has been significantly reduced and is no longer furnished. While the objective is the same between the games, the exploration is a bit limited in Gen 6. And while New Mauville feels more robust in RSE as opposed to Oris, this dynamic is kind of flip-flopped with the Abandoned Ship or Sea Mauville. In the Gen 3 games, when the Abandoned Ship was functional, it was known as the SS Cactus. Such a cute name. The player can visit the wreckage of the ship on Route 108 and explore its dilapidated interior along with its many rooms. However, the player will need the HM for dive if they intend on exploring the entire ship and locating Captain Stern's scanner, as a decent portion of this vessel lies underwater. In Oris, the ship is called Sea Marvel and is situated north of Route 108. Upon discovery, it's pretty apparent just how significantly Sea Marvel differs from its Gen 3 counterpart. Half of the ship is totally submerged, with its bow protruding from the water reminiscent of the Titanic, and the visual representation of this place feels new and refreshing. Both the interior and exterior layout of the vessel has changed as well, and I believe Gen 6 has capitalized on making Sea Marvel an interesting place to explore. I'll go into depth on the history of this place in the culture, lore, and immersion category, but Sea Marvel essentially serves the same function as it does in the Gen 3 games, only with a few more exploratory incentives here. The final location that I'll cover in this category is Sky Pillar. This massive ancient structure is located north of Route 131, but within Route 131 in Oris, and lies east of Pacific Log Town. In Ruby and Sapphire, the player won't be able to access Sky Pillar until they've entered the Hall of Fame. In Emerald and Oris, visiting this place is necessary. In order to access the structure, the player will need to pass through a small cave at the front of the island. Sky Pillar has 5 floors, and the player will need the Mach Bike in order to traverse this location, as the floor is cracked and acts similar to the floors of a Mirage Tower. At the summit of Sky Pillar resides the legendary Pokemon Rayquaza, which intervenes to calm the raging Groudon and Kyogre, and thus restoring Hoenn's natural balance. In Oris, Sky Pillar plays a major part in the post-game, and has been visually overhauled with new graphics, aesthetic appeal, content, and a giant mural depicting Rayquaza from ancient times. And I think we've finally covered all of the routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors. Whew, what a hefty category. I want to talk about my thoughts on the routes first, but real quick, before I get into my thoughts on this category, I'd like to mention that I'm specifically seeking engaging activities on the routes when it comes to scoring. A route lacks interest and significance if it only involves battling trainers and traveling between point A and point B. That's just the basic foundation of route design, the bare minimum, if you will. If every route were to only meet this minimum standard, the overall category is likely to receive a minimum score. And I don't reward the bare minimum here. I reward excellence, which honestly isn't that difficult to achieve based on my personal criteria. That doesn't just go for the routes, that goes for every aspect of the region, including the caves, forests, landmarks, and special interiors. But I've got to say, the terrain routes in Hoenn certainly feel packed with content and incentives to explore, and very few of them lack interest, with many incentives to stop and sniff the berry trees during your travels. Speaking of berry trees, they're everywhere, and I can't help but pause my journey to stop and pick them, plant and water them, and then return later to collect the fruits of my labor. And I love creating secret bases. I love finding nifty little spots around the region to make my little hideout, and often spend a bit of time and money decorating my base to make it comfy and just how I like it. The muddy slopes and ramps always piqued my interest and made me want to revisit certain routes a second time to truly gather everything that they had to offer. Not to mention all of the interesting places you'll come across as you traverse routes in Hoenn, like the Pretty Petal Flower Shop, the Daycare, Trainer Hill, the Glass Workshop, and the Weather Institute. In addition, the design and layout of the routes makes traversal easier as you progress through the game without heavily relying on HMs to comfortably get around. And the aesthetics of some of these routes play directly into Hoenn's themes. These lively environments help to tell the story of Hoenn's natural balance with their beauty, charm, and immersive qualities. Hoenn's terrain routes are what I would consider to be perfect. But I'm just not sure I can say the same for its water routes. The equality between the number of terrain routes and water routes feels both perfect in its design and somewhat strange in its execution due to the uneven availability of activities within half of them. In my opinion, this creates a feeling of borderline imbalance between the terrain and water routes, which shouldn't be the case. They should feel balanced, or at least I think they were intended to. The whole idea of splitting the region into half landmass and half ocean is an awesome idea, a great design choice, and it makes sense based on Hoenn's themes of natural balance, its history, and the story of Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza, which I'll talk about later. But when you actually experience the eastern half of Hoenn in-game, the balance just doesn't feel as smooth as it seems on paper. So I guess the real question is, are Hoenn's water routes less interesting than its terrain routes? I don't know. Do Ursa ring shit in the woods? Okay, that was a little harsh, but accurate nonetheless. Sure, you can still encounter wild Pokemon, battle trainers, and find secret bases, but for the most part, a lot of these routes are doing the bare minimum, especially if you're not interested in secret bases or aren't looking to change the one you've already made. Okay, maybe that's a little hyperbolic. Some of the water routes do contain entrances to caves that house the Reggie Trio and Emerald, either Groudon or Kyogre, but prior to the post-game, the water routes that offer the most intrigue are usually the ones that contain dive spots. This is because they allow you to access different parts of the routes and find items you wouldn't normally be able to obtain. I like their inclusion on these water routes, but there certainly aren't any berry trees, places to utilize your bikes, or interesting things to do outside of the dive spots and secret bases. The few exceptions to this pattern would be the abandoned ship, or Sea Mavel, and Sky Pillar and Oris. Y'all remember back when IGN gave Hoenn a score of 7.8, too much water? Well, I kind of can't argue with that one. Hoenn basically gets an A+ in the region design category because the idea of splitting Hoenn up into two parts is an awesome one. But in practice and implementation, I'm giving these water routes a C. For too much sea. And not enough things to see.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Okay, I'll stop. These water routes just feel like an empty ocean, which I suppose is intentional and, unfortunately, fitting. In my opinion, the caves of Hoenn feel just right. Some of them are fairly large, like the Team Magma Hideout in Emerald, the Seafloor Cavern in Victory Road, but none of them are so large that I've suffered from cave fatigue. And that's saying something, because Hoenn is absolutely peppered with caves. Meteor Falls is also quite large, but you don't actually need to traverse much of it to get through the storyline, and the remainder of the cave is just something to explore in your free time. But the majority of the caves are rather small and are simply there to house events that play into the storyline, while others just act as a means to lead you to the next area, like Rust Turf Tunnel and Fiery Path. The caves feel well balanced here in Hoenn, and like the routes, some of them even make traversing the region easier as you progress. Not to mention, they're also quite aesthetically charming, and each of them feel like they have their own identity. Honestly, I never thought I'd say this, but I do enjoy spelunking through Hoenn's caves. Petalburg Woods is alright. It ain't nothing special, but it ain't bad either. It feels like it's just par for the course. It's kinda memorable due to it being at the beginning of the game, so I ain't knocking Petalburg Woods. It's a good little forest. But the other natural landmarks and special interiors really add a ton of flavor to the region, are all very impactful, and make Hoenn feel like a place I'd like to visit in real life, given all the interesting sights and activities. But I do want to take a minute to talk about the differences I've noticed between the Gen 3 and the Gen 6 games. The alterations in layout and aesthetic enhancements introduced in the Gen 6 games are interesting, as they serve a purpose in some instances, while in others they can somewhat diminish the player's experience. The changes made to the abandoned ship with Sea Mavel are very impactful and add a bit of content as well as cultural insight into the region and some of its residents. The visual improvements made to the Petalburg Woods and the Team Aqua/Magma Hideout near Lily Cove definitely make these areas seem more realistic, lively, and well utilized. Sky Pillar has been fully transformed into a magnificent structure imbued with historical significance and an ancient quality, making it a highly immersive location to visit and explore now. But unfortunately, with the Gen 6 remakes, you gotta take the good with the bad and the ugly. The ugly being the fact that the Safari game was removed in Gen 6, and now there's no longer any challenge or excitement going on here. This Safari zone has essentially been reduced to the importance of a route that lies off the beaten path. Don't get me wrong, it's still an exploratory incentive, but all of the fun of the Safari Zone has been completely stolen from us in the Gen 6 games. I mean, it's pretty sad and also unnecessary? Like, what the fuck, Game Freak? At Major Party Foul, bro, you can go now. Your Uber's outside. We were doing just fine until you sucked all the fun out of the place. The Safari Zone used to be something I looked forward to in the Gen 3 games, and now I don't even want to go in there. Also, I'm not sure that I like the fact that Mount Pyre's interior has been both cleaned up and reduced in size. This place is supposed to feel massive and antiquated to the point of decay. In RSE, Mount Pyre used to feel dangerous and hauntingly compelling to explore. I suppose the Gen 6 games aim to pay their own respects to this location by implementing a safe and tastefully redesigned space for its visitors, but in doing so, they inadvertently stripped away much of the character that this cemetery used to possess. The same could be said for New Marvel. The interior of this building is notably smaller in the Gen 6 games and lacks the visual impact that would suggest New Marvel was intended to be a fully realized underground city. In Gen 3, there was at least an attempt to convey that this power plant once teemed with activity and hinted that at some point there were larger plans for this site. Game Freak did such a great job at subtle visual storytelling with New Marvel and RSC, and I feel like they didn't give this location the same attention in the Gen 6 games. So, for routes, natural landmarks, and special interiors, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 4.5, Gen 6 a score of 4, leaving Hoenn overall with a score of 4.25. Literally the only thing preventing Gen 3 from getting a perfect score of 5 in this category is the fact that the oceanic half of Hoenn is kind of boring and feels pretty empty. In my experience, you spend the final third of your standard playthrough in the oceanic half, and that's a large chunk of the game that needs some repair. And I will be fixing that issue in the Hoenn region repair video, so stick around for that. I've got a few ideas to liven up the water routes in Hoenn, and I think you'll be interested to hear them. Let me know if you have your own ideas, and maybe I'll incorporate them into the repair video. Hoenn makes up for this single, yet large, flaw by having so much content elsewhere in the region that I felt it wasn't appropriate to dock too many points for this, since by the time you reach the eastern half of Hoenn, you also have the ability to fly, so you don't have to surf everywhere all the time. Unfortunately, Gen 6 couldn't achieve a perfect score of 5 for the same reasons as Gen 3, but also because certain enjoyable elements of Hoenn were omitted in these games. New Marvel has no appeal anymore, and neither does the Safari Zone for that matter. They didn't even include Trainer Hill on Route 111 or the Magma Hideout in Jagged Pass from Emerald, which would have been appreciated inclusions. Mount Pyre has been stripped of its history told by its visual depiction in the Gen 3 games, and it's a shame. A damn shame. And it's madness. Absolute madness. But otherwise, Hoenn is absolutely filled with so many fun things to do, sights to see, areas to explore, and its themes and values are executed in every single area that you could possibly visit in these games. Despite my complaints, Hoenn is rich with content and deserves its overall score of 4.25, which, in my opinion, is a pretty good score. Well done, Hoenn. You done good. Okay, that covers the largest category in this review. We still got 7 more categories to cover, y'all, so hang on to your ass because we're moving on to the next category. Traversability and Transportation. I've said it before, but traversing Hoenn generally feels pretty streamlined and gets easier as you progress through the game. The interconnectedness among routes, cities, and towns allows for convenient travel and eliminates the need for excessive backtracking. But how can we go about this traversal in Hoenn exactly? Well, first, there's the running shoes provided by your mother and RSC after your initial battle with your friendly rival on Route 104. In Oris, I think you just start the games wearing them because your mom doesn't give them to you at any point. Either way, they obviously make traversal on foot a bit quicker and function like they do in HGSS, only in Hoenn your Pokemon don't follow behind you, so there's not as large of an incentive to use them over, say, the Mach Bike or the Acro Bike. These bikes are given to you by Rydell in Marvel, and you can swap them out whenever you like. The mock bike is swift and speedy and can travel up muddy slopes and across cracked flooring, and the acro bike moves at the same speed as bikes in previous games, and you can do cool tricks on them like bunny hops or wheelies. You can also travel along railways, hop sideways on them, and traverse small pedestals as well. Both of these bikes are useful here in Hoenn, and both are great options for fun traversal. There's also Mr. Briney's ferry boat that'll allow for fast travel between Route 104, Dewford Town, and Route 109. There's the cable car that transports you up the side of Mount Chimney, and I always enjoyed the little animation that played when I took the cable car. Finally, there's the SS Tidal that will transport the player between Slateport City and Lily Cove. In RSC, it can also transport the player to areas only accessible via event distribution like Birth Island, Faraway Island, and Naval Rock, which I won't be covering in this review. But it can also ferry the player to the exciting and wondrous Battle Frontier in Emerald. Another means of traversal that is absolutely necessary to employ in order to get around Hoenn would be HMs. I've covered HMs in my previous review videos, but essentially, they are moves that you'll have to teach your Pokemon, and these moves essentially take up one of their move slots and generally can't be removed until the late game. Some HMs are worse than others, and we've all made the mistake or intentional folly of teaching our starter Pokemon the move Cut, and then being stuck with this crappy move until after we've obtained our 6th gym badge. I don't particularly like HMs, and they're fairly inefficient compared to newer mechanics like Ride Pokemon or the Rotom Bike. To complete the game in Hoenn, you'll need the HMs for Rock Smash, Strength, Surf, Dive, and Waterfall. Thankfully, Cut is not necessary, but I'd argue that Rock Smash ain't much better. But there's one final way that you can traverse Hoenn that makes all the difference in the world, and that is the ability to soar on the backs of Latios or Latias in Oris. While the player will obtain a Latios or Latias once they reach Route 118, they won't be able to soar with them until Steven Stone gives you the Eon Flute after saving the world from all-out natural calamity caused by the legendaries of the region. Once obtained, the player can hop on the back of their mega-evolved Lati and soar around the region at breakneck speed. You can even do little tricks! But that's not all. While you're soaring across Hoenn, you'll even find new places to land that aren't accessible on the map. Those will be covered in the next section, but it adds even more excitement to traversing Hoenn. You can even accidentally fly into flocks of other flying Pokemon like Tailo, Swablu, and Pelipper. The soaring mechanic is a welcomed inclusion in my opinion. Traversing Hoenn feels pretty standard and not too special for the most part, until you reach Mauville City and grab either the Mach Bike or Acro Bike. I like that the games give you a choice here, and allow you to change your mind at a moment's notice. It's probably the best implementation of bikes out of all of the games, except for maybe in Galar. But you get the freedom to decide whether you want to zoom around Hoenn super fast, or if you want to pull off cool tricks and still travel faster than you normally could on foot. I usually go for the Acro Bike for my standard playthrough, and swap out to the Mach Bike when necessary. Y'all comment down below, which bike do you usually choose? HMs, in my opinion, make traversing the region less enjoyable, because it means that I'll have to structure my party of Pokemon around them, and they're a pain to get rid of, and I just feel like they restrict my freedom. Some people don't mind HMs, some people enjoy the challenge of having to use them, and others just really don't like them and see them as more of a hindrance or an inefficient means of travel. I tend to fall in the latter category, though I do see where y'all are coming from. I like the SS Tidal, but let's be honest, not many of us have used it to travel between Slateport and Lily Cove. Why? Because we already have the HM for Fly before this ferry service becomes available, so why would we want to stop at Slateport, head into the Slateport harbor, speak with the attendant, and board the ship to ride to Lily Cove when we can just fast travel straight there with Fly? Sure, you'll need to complete this process in order to visit the Battle Frontier or Battle Resort, but otherwise, I typically never board the SS Tidal to travel between the ports in Hoenn. On the flip side, I think the ability to soar was the best thing that ever happened to Hoenn. The feeling of being able to see the world around you as you fly through the sky is such an amazing feeling. I remember when I first experienced soaring in these games and I nearly shed a tear. It feels great being able to soar to any route, any city, any landmark in the game you could possibly want to land in or near, and it just feels like freedom. It may not feel as good as soaring on the back of a Hisuian Braviary now, but it felt amazing back then. And while traveling on foot ain't nothing new even with the running shoes, it certainly feels pretty good to be able to go from Meteor Falls to Rustboro, then Rustboro to Verdanturf, or from Petalburg to Route 110 between Slateport and Mauvel. While the path the player travels throughout the storyline is linear, it certainly doesn't feel that way, does it? The only other gripe that I have with traversing Hoenn is that surfing on the water routes is a slog. Thankfully, diving is an option in Hoenn, and I typically do dive underneath the water routes to avoid the wild Pokemon, weak trainers, and escape the monotonous view of endless water, plus I like the dive music. I would have preferred a better way to travel through the eastern half of Hoenn, and I have some ideas that I'm saving up for the Hoenn region repair video. Once again, stay tuned for that. So, for traversability and transportation, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 3.5, Gen 6 a score of 4, leaving Hoenn overall with a score of 3.75. Unfortunately, I can't in good conscience give Hoenn a perfect score in this category with necessary HMs in the games, and the water routes feeling like a drag to traverse. But the nifty twin bikes, Mr. Briney's boat ride, and the connectedness of the region certainly helped to bump up the score for Gen 3. Gen 6, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily improve upon the traversal methods in Gen 3, but it did introduce soaring, which I absolutely adore. Therefore, Gen 6 gets the additional half point. The only reason it didn't get a full point is because you don't gain the ability to soar until after your 7th gym badge, and that's pretty late in the game. It would have been better if you got the ability to soar when you received the HM for Fly. I know there are reasons why events didn't occur this way, but that's my opinion for you right there. Speaking of which, neither Gen 3 or Gen 6 got additional points for the SS title because using it to traverse Hoenn specifically is a bit redundant. Either way, I enjoy traversing Hoenn in both generations than I do in Gen 1 or Gen 2, but it's supposed to be that way because the newer games are supposed to improve upon these mechanics anyway, right? Right. Anyway, moving on to the next category. Exploratory Incentives. While you're journeying through Hoenn, you might find yourself taking a break to stop and check out something off the beaten path, and you might find yourself doing it quite often. And sure, most of the time you're just gonna find some items or TMs like in any other region, but still, Hoenn sure does like to tempt you with its many exploratory incentives. Firstly, we've already pretty much covered this, but the many muddy slopes and rails throughout the routes often hide some goodies behind them, and all you need to get over these obstacles are the bikes, one of which you'll always have with you. Plus, there are secret bases, some of which are fairly standard, and others have really cool layouts and are in nifty locations. In Gen 6, even more secret base locations have been added, like the Secret Islet, Secret Meadow, and Secret Shore, which are packed with these little spots to build a base. That's really the whole reason that these new areas were included. You can even get really neat, unique furniture for your base from the Glass Workshop on Route 113, the Pretty Petal Flower Shop, and even the Lily Cove Museum. If the player achieves victory in a Master Rank Pokemon contest, an artist will paint a picture of your winning Pokemon that will be displayed on the second floor of the museum. And if the player has a painting submitted for every contest category, the curator will give the player the glass ornament decoration for their secret base. In Oris, you can even purchase unique artwork for your base from a man on the first floor of the museum as well. But that's not the only place to find nifty decorations in Lily Cove. You can obviously still buy secret base decorations at the Lily Cove department store's 5th floor, however, there's another way you can buy secret base decorations. After the player has entered the Hall of Fame, they can check the TV and watch the local news, and occasionally they'll announce that a rooftop sale is occurring at the Lily Cove department store. Here you can find secret base decor that you can't find anywhere else in the region, not even inside the department store. Of course, you've got the Safari Zone as well, which I covered earlier, but this place really does provide a good excuse to explore a bit, and the Safari game in Gen 3 made it really worth it, while in Gen 6, the games kinda took away the fun. Either way, if you're looking for neat Pokemon that can't be found anywhere else, you might pop in there. Or you could play the slots at the Game Corner in Mauville in Gen 3. In Emerald, why not take a break from your journey and take on some recreational battling at Trainer Hill on Route 111? And while you're on this route, trek through the desert a bit, you might find a fossil. If you're in Emerald, bring your mock bike with you and climb Mirage Tower to nab your fossil that way. Are you feeling a bit sad that you got a cool fossil, but you kinda want the other one too? Well, thankfully in Emerald, you can visit Route 114 after becoming champion and gain access to the desert underpass located behind the Fossil Maniac's home. And once you've reached the end of the underpass, you'll find the other fossil that you weren't able to grab earlier lying in the sand. Looking for another Mirage that might be challenging to find? How about Mirage Island? I talked about it earlier when discussing Pacifidlog Town. In Gen 3, when the man alerts the player that he sees Mirage Island, the player can travel to Route 130 to hunt it down. There really isn't much here though, other than some wild Wynot and a lychee berry. But this is the only lychee berry obtainable in RSE, and they produce gold Pokeblocks. You might want to plant it and grow more before you turn it into a gold Pokeblock though. And speaking of Pokeblocks, want to test your Pokemon's coolness, cuteness, beauty, toughness, or smarts? Hit up the contest halls in Slateport, Verdanturf, Fall Arbor, and Lily Cove and have them perform in front of a live audience. But before you do, you might want to increase your odds at winning by feeding them Pokeblocks to enhance their qualities. In Gen 3, you can make Pokeblocks by utilizing the berry blenders inside of the contest halls. This little mini-game is pretty fun and kind of addicting. Or if you're just in the mood for more battles, in Emerald you can check out the battle tents located in the cities just mentioned and win some prizes while you're at it. Want a prize that can only be won by paying attention to the ocean tides? Visit Shoal Cave. Inside is a man who will request that the player bring him 4 shoal salts and 4 shoal shells, and in exchange, he'll fashion you a shell bell. Do you know how difficult it was to get through that sentence? But it's not as simple as just exploring the cave and gathering the items at once. They only appear during low tide and high tide respectively, so you'll have to visit the cave at different times of the day in order to gather the materials he's requesting. Want to get your hands on some more rare Pokemon here in Hoenn? Head to Meteor Falls with your HM for Waterfall and take on this challenging cave. Once you've reached its furthest depths, you can find the highly sought-after and elusive Bagon. Or, if you're looking for a new aquatic companion, head to Route 119 with your fishing rod and feel around the waters for a Feebas. In Gen 3, it can only be found on 6 random tiles of water throughout the entire route. Good luck. I hope you brought snacks. And if you're feeling particularly unlucky, you can change the tiles it appears in by changing the trendy phrase back in Dewford Town. They're still random, so once again, good luck. In Oris, however, Feebas is a lot easier to find, especially if you're fishing under one of the bridges on this route. If you'd like a Wynot, you can hatch one from an egg given to you by an elderly woman in Lava Ridge. Or if you're looking for something more versatile, why not add Cast Form to your team? You know, the one you got when you drove Team Magma/Aqua out of the Weather Institute. Maybe you're wanting something a little more ancient. If so, dive underwater to the depths of the ocean and scope out Relicanth, a living fossil. But don't just stop there, why not explore the deep seas of Hoenn? Who knows, you might find some rare items like colorful shards. And if you're lucky enough to find one, you should head to the treasure hunter's house east of Moss Deep City, and he'll trade you evolutionary stones for your shards. And since you're out exploring the ocean, you should definitely check out the abandoned ship or see Mauville and search for Captain Stern's scanner along with the TM for Ice Beam. I hear Sea Marvel is haunted, and if you search hard enough, you might even find the ghostly spirit tomb along with a treasure trove of goodies. But Captain Stern isn't the only one needing your help here in Hoenn. Watson also will request that you shut down the generator at New Marvel, and in exchange, he will reward you with the TM for Thunderbolt, and you might even find a Thunderstone while you're down there. Looking for a Firestone to evolve your Vulpix? Use the strength of your Pokemon to push the heavy rocks blocking your way through Fiery Path, and you just might find what you're looking for. But what if what you're looking for isn't just your run-of-the-mill Pokemon? What if you're on the hunt for legendaries? Well, Hoenn certainly has a few for you to find. In Gen 3, if you visit the Scorched Slab on Route 120, all you'll find is the TM for Sunny Day. But in Oris, you'll find much more than that. Scorched Slab is now a deep cave with 3 different levels. While you're there, you'll need to seek out Flannery, as she'll tell you of an incredibly rare Pokemon that can be found here, and that would be Heatran. But that's not the only legendary of note that's available exclusively in Oris. There are also many small islands that are only accessible by soaring, called Mirage Spots. You can find them by looking for small red glowing spots around Hoenn while soaring. These Mirage Spots hold special locations like Mirage Forests, Mirage Caves, Mirage Islands, or Mirage Mountains. These locations typically have rare Pokemon in them that aren't always available in the rest of the region, and they'll generally contain some rare and useful items as well. However, if you're searching for legendaries, then keep your eyes peeled for Crescent Isle, where the player can encounter Cresselia, Fabled Cave, where Reshiram and Zekrom can be found depending on your game version, Gnarled Den, where Kyurem lies in wait, Nameless Cavern, where the lake trio Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf can be encountered depending on the time of day, Pathless Plain, where the player may find Cobalion, Virizion, and Terrakion depending on the day of the week, and Trackless Forest, where the player can find the legendary beasts Raikou, Entei, and Suicune, who rotate out every 20 minutes. The legendaries that wouldn't normally be found in Hoenn tend to appear out of portals from other dimensions, and it's believed that these portals were created by Hoopa. But these Mirage Spots aren't the only place where legendaries can be found. A dimensional rip can be found near Dewford Town while soaring, and if you interact with it, you'll encounter either Palkia or Dialga depending on your game. If you're able to trade and have both of them, you can encounter Giratina in the same area. Lugia and Ho-Oh both appear from a portal at Sea Marvel. However, the player will need to find Captain Stern's scanner down there and return it to him, and in exchange, he'll give the player either the Clear Bell or the Tidal Bell, which are necessary to capture these version-exclusive legendaries upon your return visit to the ship. If you have cast form in your party while soaring on Latios or Latias, you might just see a looming black cloud in the sky, and that's where the legendary genies can be found. However, you'll have to have caught Thundurus and Tornadus before Landorus will appear. See, cast form isn't totally useless, just give this little cutie the time of day and it'll pay off. But damn, that's a lot of legendaries. Whew, I'm about out of breath just talking about them. Another important place to visit would be the sealed chamber located in the depths of Route 134 underneath its strong currents. Here you'll come across a stone engraved with Braille. You'll be forced to learn how to read Braille in order to figure out what the stone had written on it. This underwater stone reads, "Go up here." Once the player emerges from the water, they'll be able to enter the sealed chamber. The first chamber has stones with the alphabet carved in Braille, making deciphering Braille achievable without resorting to outside sources, as you can rely on the game itself for the information you need. If you head to the back wall of the chamber, the Braille there reads, "Dig here." Doing so will open up the second chamber. In this chamber lies 7 large rocks, and the 6 at the center of the chamber contain a special hidden message. The Gen 3 and Gen 6 versions essentially share the same message. These 6 stones all together read, "Long did we live here in this cave. all thanks to the powerful Pokemon living alongside us. Yet, we sealed that Pokemon away, alone in the dark. We feared it. If you have the courage, if you still hold to hope, open the door, for beyond it, the eternal Pokemon waits. On the back wall of the second chamber, you'll find more braille that reads, "First comes Relicanth, last comes Wailord," though Wailord and Relicanth are swapped in Emerald. In order to solve this puzzle, you'll need to have Relicanth set as your first party member and Wailord set as your sixth party member, and vice versa for Emerald. Once the puzzle is solved, the ground beneath you will begin to quake. Essentially, the sealed doors to the ancient tomb, the desert ruins, and the island cave have been opened. That is some cool shit right there. The player can then seek out the ancient tomb on Route 120 to encounter Registeel, the desert ruins in the desert on Route 111 to encounter Regirock, and the island cave on Route 105 to encounter Regice. You'll need to decipher the braille written in each of these caves as well, and I'm not gonna tell you what they say. I could if I wanted to, but honestly, I think you should explore Hoenn and the Regi phenomena for yourself. I mean, I did already provide you with half of the equation at least, right? I mean, this is probably one of the coolest exploratory incentives that I have encountered, and it's much more fun and rewarding if you decipher the braille and follow the prompts as you play, especially when the game gives you all the tools you need. The interesting thing about Island Cave is that in Oris, you can also encounter Regigigas here, after you've captured all three of the legendary titans, that is. There's just one problem. Unlike the awesome and intriguing braille system put in place in order to locate the members of the Regi trio, Regigigas does not follow the same pattern. As a matter of fact, I had to look it up. According to the Island Cave article on Bulbapedia, you'll need to speak to a girl in Pacific Town with all three members of the Regi trio in your party. But there's a caveat. Your Regice has to be nicknamed and must also be holding an ice-based item, like a Nevermelt Ice or an Icy Rock. After speaking with her, you'll be able to encounter Regigigas in the Island Cave one day after capturing the legendary titans. But only during the daytime. It cannot be encountered at night, and I have a problem with this. The game provides you with the Braille alphabet in order to solve the Braille puzzle. Honestly, you could, and should, solve the puzzle for yourself with just your game and a notepad. But for some reason, unlocking Regigigas totally screws up that experience. I understand that the girl in Pacific Town is talking about an iceberg Pokemon, and it's not hard to figure out that she's referring to Regice, but there's literally zero indication that it needs to be nicknamed or holding a particular item. Now, how the fuck are you supposed to know that? The only ways I can think of are either referring to a guidebook or looking up the answers online. But that totally ruins the fun of figuring it out with the tools you're given in the game. That's what made finding the Regi trio so awesome in the first place. This is a load of bull honky if you ask me. Way to totally dodge a gold medal, Game Freak, and suck all of the fun out of the room again. Speaking of dropping the ball again, I'm sure that many would agree that it's quite a shame that the Battle Frontier in Emerald wasn't carried over into Oris. This wondrous battle theme park was something that many of us used to enjoy, and it brought with it a wealth of content that essentially defined the post-game of Emerald. I remember expecting it to be in Oris and being excited to potentially experience it again, but Game Freak didn't include it. I mean, likely due to time constraints, but instead it was replaced with the Battle Resort. I'm glad that the Battle Resort is here, but it'll never be as amazing as the Battle Frontier. The Battle Frontier had so many interesting places to visit, like the Battle Factory, the Battle Arena, the Battle Dome, the Battle Pike, the Battle Palace, the Battle Pyramid, and the Battle Tower, each with unique battle rules and leaders called Frontier Brains with unique designs and mechanics that could keep you occupied for months after finishing the game's storyline. Artisan Cave can also be found here and is somewhat large with 2 floors. The only Pokemon that can be found here is Smeargle. I'm sure that this cave was intended to be used differently, but that's just about all that's going on in Artisan Cave. There was so much content at the Battle Frontier, and I just feel like not including it in the Gen 6 games was a massive missed opportunity. I think we all feel it. Either way, the Battle Resort is at least something. It essentially acts like the Battle Maison in Kalos. Here, you can leave your Pokemon at a daycare, have the stat judge determine the IVs of your Pokemon, play a little mini-game with some Whismur, and utilize the mini move tutors. I want to briefly touch on Altering Cave real quick. This cave can be found on Route 103 exclusively in Emerald after entering the Hall of Fame. This area was intended to be used for mystery gift event distributions, but it got scrapped somewhere along the line and is currently empty with nothing but Zubat in this cave. I can't give out points for intentions though, because if you can't experience it while you're in the region itself, then the region doesn't get points for it. And sure, you can experience the cave itself, but there's nothing to experience within it. Next, let's talk about Marine Cave and Terra Cave. These two are also exclusive to Emerald and house Kyogre and Groudon respectively. These two caves do not appear in a static location in the region and can never appear at the same time. As a matter of fact, in order to locate them, you'll need to speak with a guy at the Weather Institute and he'll talk with you about a route having strange weather conditions. If you head there as fast as you can, you might just be lucky enough to encounter these caves and the incredible legendary Pokemon within them. But the ultimate legendary Pokemon that compels exploration across the entirety of Hoenn is none other than the most legendariest of Hoenn legends, the one who rules in the heaven on high, the majestic Rayquaza. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, you'll need to have been recorded in the Hall of Fame first, but in Emerald, you'll first need to watch Rayquaza break up the fight between Groudon and Kyogre, but after that, Rayquaza is patiently waiting for your arrival, baby, beckoning you to challenge the Master of the Skies at the peak of Sky Pillar. There are so many exploratory incentives in Hoenn that make this game so worthwhile to play. Just about every route, including the water routes, cities, towns, and caves, have something in them worth exploring. I can spend hours just doing the extra side activities that Hoenn provides. And as I said earlier, the quest for the Reggie Trio is one of the coolest exploratory incentives. I hate that Regigigas didn't follow suit in Oris, but at least those games added just about every legendary you could possibly want. I'm not going to summarize my feelings on the points I've made in this category. That would take forever, and I'm sure you know what I'm going to say. For exploratory incentives, I'm giving Gen 3, Gen 6, and Hoenn overall a perfectly perfect score of 5 across the board. You might initially think, but does Gen 3 really deserve the same score as Gen 6 when Oris added all of the new legendaries and locations? And the answer to that is absolutely. Think about just how much content was added in the Gen 3 games in Emerald, most of which was actually missing from Gen 6, including the entire Battle Frontier in lieu of the Battle Resort. And the Gen 6 games did themselves a disservice by removing some other exploratory incentives like the Safari game, berry blending, the Game Corner, for understandable reasons, just to name a few. As a matter of fact, if you removed those additional legendaries, Gen 3 would probably score higher than Gen 6. But as it stands, Emerald adds enough content to earn Gen 3 a perfect score of 5, and Gen 6 added and retained enough content to achieve the same score. Congratulations, Hoenn! You've earned every single point in your glorious 5-point score. Alright, let's move on to the next category. Culture lore, and immersion. The region of Hoenn has a history forged by a cataclysmic battle of natural forces that birthed the lands and seas within its territory. Kyogre, the legendary embodiment of the sea, and Groudon, the ancient symbol of the land, both fueled by primal wrath, clashed in a battle for supremacy over the region. The forces of nature yielded to their mighty will, plunging the environment into profound imbalance. Whirlpools and tsunamis clashed with volcanic magma and colossal earthquakes and disrupted the natural order on an unprecedented scale. Amidst this primordial chaos, Rayquaza, the guardian of the sky and arbiter of balance, descended from the heavens. With its formidable presence, Rayquaza intervened, pacifying the raging forces and plunging the beasts into a perpetual slumber before returning to the skies. What remained of this ancient battle is what we know to be Hoenn today. Its landmass and ocean stand in proportion as balanced as the strength of Groudon and Kyogre, forever symbolizing a cautionary tale of the delicate nature of equilibrium in this harmonious and enduring state. Damn, that's cool. Yeah, essentially Groudon and Kyogre created Hoenn as we know it, and Rayquaza ended their quarreling much like the events of the storyline in Hoenn today. Gen 6 expands upon this by including the fact that Groudon and Kyogre were actually in their primal forms when the battle that created Hoenn took place, but the history of Hoenn doesn't end in ancient times. In Gen 3, Archie, the leader of Team Aqua, believes that all life depends on the sea and wishes to create an ideal world by expanding the oceans for the betterment of both humans and Pokemon. Maxie, the leader of Team Magma, has his own ideals of a perfect world that include the advancement of all life on land, but his plans include expanding the landmass so that people and Pokemon may prosper. However, in Gen 6, their motivations are quite different. In Oris, Archie is concerned about the detrimental impact of selfish human activities on the sea and believes it is important to all life, including Pokemon. He criticizes the pollution and destruction caused by human greed, leading to a loss of habitat for Pokemon. Archie believes that humanity deserves consequences for its actions, but worries about the innocent Pokemon that may suffer as a result. In response, he decides to take drastic measures to restore the seas and nature to their pristine state, aiming to undo the damage caused by humans. He intends to harness the power of primal Kyogre to wipe out all of human civilization and reduce the environment back to its original state within the sea. Maxie, on the other hand, believes Team Magma's goal of advancing humanity's progression and evolution is a noble one. He sees the land as the crucial stage for human development, a platform for growth, exploration, development, and exploitation. Maxie believes that expanding the landmass is essential for the continued evolution and happiness of humanity and all life. He emphasizes the importance of a vast land as a foundation for human endeavors and frames Team Magma's actions as a means to create a future of eternal happiness. Team Magma essentially seeks to dismantle the idea of coexistence and aims to enlarge the land, providing more space for human civilization to flourish and develop. Once again, the opposing sides seem to follow the same themes that are woven into the very fabric of Hoenn itself. Archie dislikes what human has done to the lives of Pokemon and the environment and wishes to eradicate all civilization, where Maxie cares only for the advancement of humanity and civilization and kind of views Pokemon as an afterthought in his plans. Both of them are so focused on their goals that they never stop to think about the consequences of harnessing the brutality of nature for their selfish ideas and disrupting its delicate balance. Both of them recognize their folly when they thrust both Groudon and Kyogre into their primal forms and watch in horror as the world falls back into natural chaos as it did in ancient times. No life can be sustained under the extreme weather conditions of harsh sunlight or an endless monsoon. Only then do they come to the conclusion that they were wrong, after the ancient Pokemon begin warring against each other once again. Hoenn not only teaches the valuable lesson of coexistence and balance of nature, but it also reminds us that history has a tendency to repeat itself. This becomes evident when the mighty Rayquaza leaves its resting place at the peak of Sky Pillar and descends from the skies to quell the mighty beasts once again. Exclusively in Oris, Rayquaza does more than just prevent the world from falling into a perpetual natural disaster. Its role has been expanded in the Delta episode. This is essentially the post-game storyline of Oris, and provides some additional insight into Hoenn's history, as well as another catastrophic event that will soon become part of that history. The Draconid people date back to ancient times and worship Rayquaza for bringing peace to the region. These folk lived inside meteor falls many thousands of years ago when meteor showers were a consistent threat to the land. 1,000 years prior to the current day, a particular meteor struck the Earth and awoke the mighty Groudon and Kyogre once again. The lore keeper of the tribe harnessed the power of the Rainbow Stone to call upon Rayquaza and wished for peace in the land once again. This wish was so powerful that Rayquaza attained natural Mega Evolution without the use of a Mega Stone. Thanks to the Lore Keeper's wish, this ancient cycle had successfully repeated itself once again as Rayquaza stopped the feuding beast, and harmony in Hoenn was restored. After this event, the Draconid people built Sky Pillar and decorated it with a mural depicting their Mega-Evolved Dragon Lord, as well as their tribe. This would be their place to summon Rayquaza should calamitous events ever occur again. However, their prophecy foretold that history would perpetuate itself. They predicted that 1,000 years after the construction of Sky Pillar, another meteor would strike Hoenn again, reigniting the conflict between the two legendary Pokemon, and they intended on calling upon Rayquaza once more. By the time the player meets with Zinnia, the entire Draconid tribe has been wiped out with the exception of her and an elderly woman named Aster, who still resides in Meteor Falls, from whom the player is given a meteorite shard. This is because in current day, a giant meteor is headed straight for Hoenn, and the prophecy of the Draconid people has come true. The Moss Deep Space Center is currently trying to figure out a way to stop this meteor with the use of infinity energy. This energy was developed by the Devon Corporation and is used to fuel the rockets that launch from the Space Center. As a matter of fact, they were planning on sending a rocket full of infinity energy into space in order to teleport the meteor to another dimension. However, Zinnia destroyed their plans because she believes she knows of a better way, as she is now the Draconid lore keeper and intends on calling upon Rayquaza. Which probably is for the best, considering that infinity energy is essentially generated by harnessing the life force of Pokemon, referred to as bioenergy, and is what was utilized by the Devon Corporation in its creation. Basically, the player tracks down Zinnia to each location she goes to, as she's trying to obtain keystones as a means to make Rayquaza Mega Evolve. Finally, the player follows her to Sky Pillar, where Zinnia explains the history of the Draconids and explains why this is the only way to prevent the meteor from destroying the world. However, when she calls upon the majestic Rayquaza, her plan fails, as the keystones she's collected aren't enough to Mega Evolve her Dragon Lord. Instead, the player utilizes the meteor shard that was given to them in Meteor Falls, and this shard interacts with Rayquaza's Mikado organ, which causes it to Mega Evolve right then and there. The player then puts on a special suit and rides on the back of this Pokemon into space, where the meteor is then destroyed by a Mega Evolved Rayquaza. However, inside of this meteoroid lies the DNA Pokemon Deoxys. The two have an incredible battle of speed and strength amongst the stars in space before Deoxys is caught or defeated by the player. After the destruction of the world has been prevented by the player alongside Mega Rayquaza, Zinnia has then vanished, and the player returns to Little Root Town and watches the Lit Leonid meteor shower with their friendly rival. Zinnia is now searching for her own purpose in life, and the events of this calamity are bound to become a permanent fixture in Hoenn's historical records. Hoenn has such an epic backstory, but the events of its creation and the prevention of its destruction aren't the only bits of lore about this place found in the games. As a matter of fact, Hoenn's themes of maintaining the balance of nature and coexistence between people and Pokemon can be experienced in its culture all over the region. By speaking to the residents of Hoenn, you'll likely hear them tell you how important it is that people and Pokemon live in harmony. And they're almost always discussing nature and how the locals are constantly aiming to preserve it. Folks in Petalburg love talking about how much they enjoy travel or how they wish they could explore Hoenn's mountains, seas, and caves. Others in Lava Ridge will explain the holistic benefits of bathing in the hot springs. Not only that, but they draw as much water as they need every day. But the water never runs out, indicating that these folks never take more from nature than what they need, and nature rewards them for it. Fall Arbor's residents are sure to plant seedlings of hardy trees that grow well in soil that contains volcanic ash. A woman married to a man in Dewford Town will explain that she moved here from Slateport after she married her husband, and that being surrounded by the sea is happiness too. The residents of Fortree City are so proud of their homes that they will often explain to the player that living amongst nature keeps them strong and healthy, and that people don't need to destroy the forest, but instead they choose to live within and alongside it. The folks of Lily Cove will tell you stories about the seafloor cavern, and there is other evidence of this concern for the environment all over Hoenn. Rusturf Tunnel is actually a man-made cave, and its construction was initially funded by Mr. Stone at the Devon Corporation in order to not only connect Rustboro to Verdanturf, but also Mauville and Slateport as well, allowing for easy travel in the west of Hoenn. However, the remainder of the construction was halted when Mr. Stone realized that the heavy machinery used to dig this tunnel was disturbing the little Whismur that made their homes there. The project was abandoned by the Devon Corporation, but a local man decided to take it upon himself to continue digging the tunnel without any heavy machinery and without disturbing the Pokemon in the environment. And he put all of this effort into digging this tunnel just so that he could visit his girlfriend, Wanda, Wally's cousin in Verdanturf. How sweet is that? This man is dedicated to his woman. That's real commitment right there. But this is just another example of how much the people of Hoenn care about its natural environments, enough to abandon an entire construction project so that the local Pokemon wouldn't suffer. And even then, those who do wish for the construction to continue do so with these Pokemon in mind and are careful not to disturb them. But this wasn't the only project that was abandoned in order to preserve the homes and safety of Pokemon. In addition to the Rusturf Tunnel, both New Mauville and Sea Mauville were major projects that were both started and terminated by the Greater Mauville Holdings Company in Oris. The Greater Mauville Holdings page on Bulbapedia is a great source of information about this place, and I think it best explains this company. Essentially, it states that Greater Mauville Holdings had some major plans to implement more urban infrastructure, the creation and implementation of infinity energy as essentially an infinitely renewable energy source, and made plans for the deep-sea extraction of this resource. But all of their plans ultimately failed, with the exception of reconstructing Mauville into Maulville. Turns out that's literally the only project they've successfully completed. New Mauville is a power plant that was intended to be a large underground city, but was closed down due to wild Pokemon using it as a habitat. This, in turn, led to the closure of Sea Mauville, which also resulted in becoming a Pokemon habitat preserve. The failure of these projects caused the permanent closure of Greater Marvel Holdings in its entirety. But Sea Marvel has a more dubious history than that of its power plant counterpart. This was previously a research facility that was set out to extract natural resources from the ocean. This project was led by Watson, of all people, who worked here alongside Captain Stern and Doc. This place seemed like it used to be a pretty unethical place of business as well.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Yeah, this seems like a job from hell, if you ask me. They even have a company song where the employees are supposed to sing about not taking any days off, swearing their selfless devotion, unionizing is out of the question, and working through sleepless nights in order to drive out their competition, all while they dig out great energy for the bright future of Hoenn. Give me a fucking break. Wait, no. Sorry, give them a fucking break, sheesh. But that's not all, it gets worse. There are many papers and old documents strewn about the ship that detail what happened here. There's a crumpled up note here that explains that one of the employees is grateful that this place is closing down and thankful that Captain Stern has offered him and Doc a job at his shipyard when they had expected to be left adrift. That's fucking bleak. Anyway, you could find all kinds of notes, old documents, magazine clippings, and letters strewn about the wreckage, and most of it details the closure of Sea Marvel. The leadership of this project feels the weight and the burden of the environmental damage done, but they're relieved that it's coming to an end. Other hints are dropped that when the closure of the project had reached the press, Greater Marvel Holdings gave no comment, while Watson spilled all the tea regarding what happened while he was there. But the most interesting piece of lore is a series of letters that can be found here. These letters are essentially a son writing to his father who's employed on this ship. They're incredibly sad, as you can essentially read about how this boy misses his father who never comes home and watches his parents grow apart due to his father's absence. He talks about school and doing homework and how he peers at the stars through his telescope as he yearns for his father's return. This boy even sends his father a skitty doll and a photo of himself with his telescope, with his mother standing next to him, looking bored. This young boy is Takao Cosmo. In other words, Professor Cosmo. You know, the one we met at Meteor Falls? And he's writing to his father, Rizzo Cosmo, who spent his life working at Sea Marvel until its dissolution. Rizzo is still alive, and his nephew is hunting for the bounty of treasure said to be hidden within the wreckage. I'm not going to share any more details than that. You should play the games for yourself and explore Sea Marvel to find all of the letters and read the story for yourself. You may even find out more about Rizzo if you can find the hidden treasure. This is just further evidence of how the destruction of the natural environment and treating both people and Pokemon poorly can result in traumatic events, not just for the environment and the surrounding Pokemon, but for the company who caused this mess and the employees who worked there. I suppose Hoenn also tells the story of karma as well. Hoenn also offers some insight into its culture and information on its environments with the inclusion of the Pokenav Plus in Gen 6. The Pokenav Plus offers a few different applications like Area Nav, Buzz Nav, Dex Nav, and Play Nav. The Play Nav won't be covered in this review, as its functions don't pertain to the Hoenn region itself, and the Dex Nav will be covered in the next category. However, the first two applications do pertain to this category. The Area Nav is essentially the player's map, but it has some additional functionality. The player can select any location on the map, and the Area Nav will provide some additional details and insights about that location. Sometimes this will be cultural elements, like if a certain route is favored by trainers, how the weather conditions affect a particular area, or just how swimmers feel about swimming in a route's waters. I won't cover every single area in the game, but just know that you can learn a ton about Hoenn just by selecting a location on the area nav and reading about the history, geography, weather conditions, or just how the locals of Hoenn perceive that location. But that's not all that the area nav does. It'll even tell you if there are harvestable berries, secret bases, or even trainers that are prepared to rematch you in any given area. It functions similarly to the Trainer's Eyes application on the PokeNav in Gen 3. However, what's relevant to this category is that by selecting a trainer, you can view their trainer profile and learn more about them, like what kind of Pokemon they like, their favorite places, or even how they prefer to battle. It's a nice way to learn more about the people of Hoenn. This acts similar to calling them in Gen 3. On the other hand, the Buzz Nav is another great way to keep up with all of the local news being broadcast from TV Marvel. You, as the player, can essentially watch yourself make the news every time an important event occurs in the games. Or even when you do something fairly mundane like catching a Pokemon. It kind of seems like there's someone following you around all the damn time. This application provides more than just the news, as there are other programs that offer additional cultural insight into these games. This is similar to watching the TV and the Gen 3 games, and their programs are full of quirky information that you just might get a kick out of. I suggest you keep an eye on both the TV and the BuzzNav to keep up on all of the latest news and maybe get a chuckle every once in a while. So, for culture, lore, and immersion, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 4, Gen 6 a score of 5, leaving Hoenn overall with a score of 4.5. However, I do have one single gripe with Gen 6, but Oris isn't the only culprit of this issue I have. I think the lack of lore behind a lot of the additional legendaries and their simplistic acquisition methods, such as stumbling upon a random island and entering a dimensional portal, kind of diminishes their importance. They feel inconsequential, like they were included merely for the sake of it, and lack the rich history and significance that defines their legendary status. The extra legendaries in Oris just kind of feel like trophies to collect. As a matter of fact, a lot of newer games seem to follow this trend. I think it's because many of us just want to be able to catch Lugia in every single game, and Game Freak wants to make that possible for us, but that simply doesn't align with its established history in Johto, or at least not as it stands now. I just wish that Game Freak was given the extra time to add continuity to these legendaries' appearance in the regions outside of their own. As it stands, catching Lugia and Ho-Oh doesn't feel important at all anymore, not without an explanation as to why they're here. And I'm sorry, but dimensional portals are kind of a cop-out in my opinion. I hope that in the future, the Pokemon Company will just give Game Freak the extra time necessary to add meaning and purpose to the returning legendaries. But, you know, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a magical Pokemon game. Regardless, Gen 6 still deserves its perfect score of 5, and I'm not deducting any points for this issue. It's just something that I've noticed throughout the years, and I really wish it would be addressed. Thankfully, Gen 6 Hoenn makes up for this in many other ways. As I stated earlier, Hoenn's history is marked by dramatic natural disasters, succeeded by prolonged periods of tranquility and balance, ushered in by Rayquaza. In this review, I likened Hoenn's geography to the yin-yang symbol, reflecting its overarching theme of balance, a concept extending to every facet of its history, lore, and the culture of its inhabitants. Hoenn narrates a tale of impermanence, illustrating that no matter how enduring peace may seem, it is inevitably disrupted by chaos. Yet regardless of how long this chaos continues, it is always succeeded by an era of serenity. This mirrors the natural ebb and flow of life where people, Pokemon, and nature are interconnected, collectively contributing to the enduring charm of Hoenn, a region delicately poised in the balance of nature. And if you pay close attention to the finer details, Hoenn imparts a lesson on karma, illustrating how misdeeds and negligence can lead to one's own suffering, while also emphasizing that no good deed goes unrewarded. These lessons are woven into the very fabric of Hoenn's existence, and it implores you to cut a square of this cloth to keep with you throughout your lifetime. You may notice that Gen 3 was given a lower score than Gen 6 in this category, and that's because the history and motivations of the villainous teams are kind of shallow in those games. I mean, it's still there, and it's still pretty good, and it deserves its great score of 4. I just think Gen 6 absolutely capitalizes on expanding the history, lore, and cultural themes of Hoenn, and by doing so, it most certainly deserves a perfect score of 5. Anyway, let's move on to the next category. Pokemon Diversity. Real quick, before I get into this category, I want to note that for the purposes of this review, I will be referring to Kanto Pokemon as the original 151 Pokemon introduced in Red, Blue, and Yellow, Johto Pokemon as the subsequent 100 Pokemon that were added in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and Hoenn Pokemon as the following 135 new Pokemon that were introduced in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. This trend will continue to follow throughout my reviews into Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, and so on. I feel it necessary to give y'all this disclaimer because I just know someone in the comments is going to be like, but aren't all Pokemon found in Hoenn considered Hoenn Pokemon? And they wouldn't be incorrect per se, it just makes it easier on me in this review, okay? Sure, I could call them Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3 Pokemon, but I think referring to them by their debut region name just sounds better to me. That is how I'm going to be doing it in this review. I just wanted to keep y'all in the loop, you know? Hoenn's Pokemon diversity is quite an interesting case. In Kanto, you were stuck seeing the same evolutionary lines all over the region with quite a few Pokemon that I believe should have been more readily available to the player. In Johto, you just didn't see too many Johto Pokemon unless you utilized the new mechanics the Game Freak implemented in those games. And even then, the entire region was absolutely dominated by Kanto Pokemon, and the Johto Pokemon got very little representation and failed to shine in their own debut region. Thankfully, Hoenn doesn't suffer from either of these issues, as Hoenn Pokemon are dominant in the region, and every single one of them, with the exception of the legendaries and Beldum, are available before the player takes on the Elite Four. So, Hoenn is off to a great start in this category. However, since the entire region is divided in half by land mass and water, I'll be looking at Hoenn's Pokemon diversity through the same lens and analyzing this category by separating the two. Let's start off by addressing Hoenn's repeat Pokemon. Every region has them. It's fairly obvious to the player when they see the same Pokemon over and over again across the entire region. I don't mind encountering a few Pokemon multiple times across a number of routes, as long as they aren't so prevalent that they dominate the encounters of the areas to the point that they limit the region's variety. Variety is the spice of life, after all. And while I prefer not to encounter the same evolutionary line repeatedly, it's not such a big deal when there are 2, 3, or 4 unique Pokemon available alongside them in any given area. Hoenn's terrain routes actually don't have as many repeat Pokemon as you'd think. Zigzagoon and Linoone appear on 12 out of the 17 terrain routes in all the games except Emerald. Poochyena and Mightyena appear on only 3 routes in Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, but appear on 10 different routes as well as in the Petalburg Woods in Emerald. Emerald does a little flip-flopping with its version and its exclusives, but remember, I don't account for exclusive Pokemon, only Gen 3 in its entirety. Therefore, in Gen 3, both Zigzagoon's line and Poochyena's line heavily repeat throughout Hoenn, while in Oris, Zigzagoon is significantly more prevalent than the latter. Wingull repeats a ton in Hoenn, but I'll cover that one when we get to the water routes, even though it's very common on the terrain routes as well. But the other Pokemon that repeats somewhat frequently in Hoenn is Oddish, along with Gloom, who appear on 6 different terrain routes, along with the Safari Zone. The only other Pokemon that repeat a bit in the games are Zubat and Golbat, bet you didn't see that one coming, who can be found in just about every single cave in the region. Honestly, this spread of repeat Pokemon in Hoenn is really not too bad. Sure, you see Zigzagoon and Poochyena's lines quite often, but Oddish's line and even the Zubat line don't repeat so often that you get tired of seeing them. And most of the routes where Zigzagoon and Poochiena and their evolutions can be found also contain unique Pokemon, so it never feels like they dominate the region, just that they're common. You would think that the Wurmple line, the Lotad line, the Seedot line, or the Tailo line would be common in Hoenn, but they're actually not found on too many routes. They are early game staples, but they don't pester you throughout the mid-game, or the late game for that matter. Hoenn's terrain routes are well balanced in my opinion, but that is absolutely not the case for the water routes. The water routes in Hoenn suffer so badly from repeat Pokemon that it becomes annoying to encounter Pokemon on them. But I'm not exactly just covering Hoenn's water routes here, I'm covering its water Pokemon, because that's the real issue in this category. So, I'll also be covering where they're located on the terrain routes as well. Let's break that down real quick. You will encounter Magikarp on every single water route in Hoenn. As a matter of fact, Magikarp's line can be fished up in every single body of water and every water tile in the region unless you're fishing with the Super Rod. Oh, and don't think you're safe from Tentacle's line either. Literally, it's easier to discuss the locations where this line isn't found than where it is. Tentacle's line is found on every single water route by both fishing and surfing, and is in the majority of the terrain routes with the exception of the freshwater ponds and lakes. And don't think I forgot about you, Wingull. That's right, get your ass up here because you're a pain in the ass too, little buddy. Not you, Pico. You're cool. But the rest of the Wingull line can be found while surfing on every single route with the exception of terrain routes 101, 102, 111, 112, 113, 116, 117, 120, and the cities and towns that don't have bodies of water in them. In other words, this line appears on 26 of the 34 routes, and that doesn't include Hoenn cities or towns either. Oh, and I hope you didn't think that the Magikarp, Tentacle, and Wingull lines were the only offenders here, because they are not. The Wailmer line is as common as the Wingull line, it's just not found in the tall grass on any of the terrain routes. Oh, and don't assume you'll be getting better results with fishing, because the Magikarp, Tentacool, and Wailmer lines absolutely dominate in that sphere as well, no matter what rod you're using. Carvana is a nice break from the monotony, but it's only available on routes 118 and 119 with the Super Rod, but its evolution, Sharpedo, can be found on routes 103, 118, and every single water route with the Super Rod. Thankfully, Route 119 is home to Feebas, which can be caught with the old rod, and I think it's important to mention even if it is very rare in the Gen 3 games. But ultimately, you ain't gonna be finding too much variety within Hoenn's waters unless you're searching pretty hard for it. There are very few standouts in Hoenn that should be discussed at least a little. Goldine's line can be found in all of the freshwater bodies of the region. The Barboach line can be found on routes 111, 114, 120, and Meteor Falls in RSE, in addition to Victory Road and Scorched Slab in Oris. The Corfish line can be found on routes 102, 117, and Petalburg City with the Good Rod or the Super Rod, in addition to Route 123 in Oris. Staryu can be found exclusively in Lily Cove City in RSE, but is also available in the Team Aqua/Magma Hideout in Oris with the Super Rod. Corsola and Lovedisk can be fished up with the same rod on Route 128 and in Evergrande City in RSE, but Oris made Lovedisk available in Victory Road as well. The Horsey line can be fished up on routes 132, 133, and 134 with the Super Rod, and that's just about all of the Pokemon that are available on the water routes. You know what I noticed about these other Pokemon though? Most of them are only available with the Super Rod that you get when you reach Moss Deep City. In other words, Pokemon like Staryu, Corsola, Lovedisk, Horsey, and Seadra can't be obtained until the late game. I've spotted another pattern here as well. Most of Hoenn's diversity when it comes to water types is mainly experienced by fishing, not surfing. So while surfing through Hoenn's water routes, which is the main form of traversability in that section of the game, you'll only be encountering repeat Pokemon. And yes, Hoenn does offer a diverse roster of water types, but many of them are only available on the terrain routes. Thankfully, the water routes do contain underwater areas, which help to add some diversity, I suppose. By diving underwater, the player now has access to Clamperl, Chinchou, and the rare Relicanth on routes 124 and 126 in RSE, in addition to Corsola on route 128, exclusively in ORIS. Thankfully, ORIS expanded the encounter locations for Chinchou, Lantern, Clamperl, and Relicanth to routes 107, 129, and 130, and essentially made them even more available than before. However, you don't get the ability to dive until after you receive your 7th gym badge, so these encounters are, once again, sequestered to the late game, even worse than the Super Rod is. The good news is that for the most part, Hoenn does make most of its terrain locations feel unique and fun to explore regardless. This is because many of its routes and natural landmarks contain certain Pokemon that can't be found almost anywhere else in the region, and some are even found with a low encounter rate. These are Pokemon that are almost exclusive to their natural landmarks and routes. Please note that if another member of a Pokemon's evolutionary line can be found elsewhere in the region, it won't be mentioned here, unless there is something notable about the location itself. Let's talk about the natural landmarks first. Slackoth is available exclusively in Petalburg Woods along with Shroomish. Whismur is exclusive to Rusturf Tunnel, though Loudred can be found on Victory Road. It's just that Whismur is the only Pokemon available in Rusturf Tunnel. Abra and Nosepass are both exclusive to Granite Cave, though Abra can be found on Route 116 in Emerald. Magnemite can only be found in New Mauville. Grimer, Coughing, and Torkoal are exclusive to Fiery Path, with the exception of the latter also being available in the Magma Hideout in Emerald. Solrock and Lunatone and Bagon can only be found in Meteor Falls. Spoink can only be found on Jagged Pass. Vulpix, Chimecho, and Meditite are only available at Mount Pyre, though in Ruby and Sapphire, Meditite can be found on Victory Road. Spheal and Celio can only be found in Shoal Cave, and Snorunt can only be found in the Ice Room in Shoal Cave in RSE. This is not a natural landmark, but Beldum can only be obtained by Steven Stone in Moss Deep after entering the Hall of Fame. Next, let's talk about the terrain routes. So, Ralts can only be found on Route 102, Plusle and Minun and Gulpin can only be found on Route 110, Trapinch and Cacnea are only available on Route 111, though Trapinch can also be found in Mirage Tower in Emerald. Spinda and Skarmory are exclusively available in Route 113. Zangoose and Seviper are exclusive to Route 114. Jigglypuff can only be found in the north of Route 115. Skitty can only be encountered on Route 116. Volbeat, Illumise, and Roselia are exclusive to Route 117. Feebas can only be fished up on Route 119, Castform is given to you by somebody at the Weather Institute, and Absol can only be encountered on Route 120. Finally, as far as the water routes are concerned, there's only one, and it's Staryu, and it can only be found in Lily Cove City, except in Oris, it can also be found in the Team Aqua and Magma hideout near Lily Cove. Another way the player can encounter rare Pokemon in the Gen 6 games is by utilizing the Dex Nav. It'll tell you all of the Pokemon you've caught in any given area and allow you to search for those Pokemon in the wild. By using the search function, the player can increase their odds of encountering the same Pokemon multiple times and can actually interact with certain Pokemon that rustle in the tall grass, kick up dirt in caves, or make waves in the water. In addition, it makes certain rare Pokemon a little easier to find, as wild Pokemon will make themselves known to the player without even having to scan for them. After the player obtains the National Dex in Oris, Pokemon from Gens 4, 5, and 6 can be found by using the search function on the Dex Nav, which does help to improve the Pokemon diversity really late into the games. Thankfully, you can obtain the National Dex after battling with Groudon or Kyogre during the storyline, making it possible to encounter these Pokemon prior to obtaining your 8th gym badge. I won't be going into detail on all of the benefits to using the search function, as they pertain specifically to Pokemon and their qualities as opposed to the Hoenn region itself. But since you can experience Pokemon interacting with the world and can find rare Pokemon this way, I thought it was worth a mention. In addition, after the player obtains the National Dex in Emerald, 2 new areas of the Safari Zone become unlocked, which added even more Pokemon diversity by including more Johto Pokemon to be found and caught while playing the Safari game. Have you noticed a pattern with Hoenn's Pokemon diversity? It's basically half perfect and half horrific. Hoenn's terrain routes actually don't suffer from repeat Pokemon. Sure, they're there, but they don't take up so much space that other Pokemon fail to shine. There's a difference between a region having repeat Pokemon and suffering from repeat Pokemon. I think Hoenn does a perfect job at balancing out its Pokemon diversity on the terrain routes by having so many unique Pokemon on so many different routes that it feels like almost every single terrain route and natural landmark has a special Pokemon exclusive to its area. I think this also incentivizes the player to spend more time on the terrain routes, explore the natural landmarks, and give the player the ability to build a unique team each time they play. In other words, Hoenn's Pokemon diversity in these areas actually elevates the replayability of both Gen 3 and Gen 6. However, that's only half of the story here. Because when it comes to the water routes, Hoenn suffers immensely from repeat Pokemon. There is such little Pokemon diversity in the oceanic half of Hoenn that it becomes annoying and frustrating to encounter Pokemon. That's because while you're surfing across the water routes, which is the only way to get around, you'll only be encountering Tentacool, Tentacruel, Wingull, and Pelipper. That's it. The same evolutionary lines over and over again. The only exception is the ability to encounter Wailord in Ruby and Emerald on Route 129 with a 1% encounter rate. That small chance to encounter an extremely rare Wailord in only 2 versions of the Gen 3 games does not make up for the fact that surfing in these games will provide literally 0 Pokemon diversity. Madness. Absolute madness. Raise your hand if you just repelled your way through the water routes in the late game. Yeah, that's what I thought. Or maybe you did what I did and just dived under the water as often as you could to break up the monotony. And let's be clear, the Old Rod hardly provides any Pokemon diversity. You'll mainly be reeling in Magikarp and Tentacool outside of a few spots where you can find Goldeen and the very rare Feebas exclusive to Route 119. That's actually an improvement upon previous games, but not by much. The Old Rod is about as good as it's ever been. The Good Rod, however, gives you a few more encounters with Goldeen, Carvanha, Wailmer, Barboach, and Corphish, but the rest of the diversity is sequestered to the late game with the Super Rod used to catch Staryu, Corsola, Luvdisc, Horsea, and Seadra, along with a few fully evolved species of previously mentioned Mons. And I'm sorry, but Corsola and Luvdisc have no business being exclusively available that late in the game. But for the most part, no matter what rod you're using, you're gonna be encountering a metric shit ton of the Magikarp, Tentacool, and Wailmer lines, and arguably the Carvanha line in the late game. Well, that's right. 4 repeat evolutionary lines absolutely dominate the fishing encounters as well. The issue of repeat Pokemon in Hoenn's water routes among its water types is so egregious and infuriating that it makes the latter half of the games unenjoyable and slows the excitement of exploration to a dead stop. The water routes took the issues of Kanto's Pokemon diversity and amplified it by like 10. If Hoenn's terrain routes improve the replayability of the Hoenn-based games, then the water routes diminish it. The underwater areas do offer some diversity, and it is much appreciated for sure. But they are a drop in the ocean of the oceanic issues that make up half of this region. So, for Pokemon diversity, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 3, Gen 6 a score of 3.5, resulting in Hoenn receiving an overall score of 3.25. All of the issues in Gen 3 were carried over to the Gen 6 games and absolutely were not improved upon. What's the deal with the remakes not addressing the issues of the original games? I get that they want to maintain the integrity of the original games, but there's no reason that they shouldn't take these remakes as an opportunity to make them even better. The only reason that Gen 3 didn't score 2.5 is because Emerald made a few more Pokemon slightly more accessible, and the perfection of the terrain routes totally carried the water routes, resulting in the generation receiving slightly more than an average score. Gen 6 scored the same way for the same reasons, but got an additional half point for its inclusion of the Dex Nav, which offers a ton more Pokemon diversity, but it only gets a half point because that diversity is implemented very late in the games, but it still deserves credit for it nonetheless. Ultimately, Hoenn could have easily gotten a perfect score here if the water routes were given as much attention as the other half of the region. Definitely stay tuned for the region repair because I've got tons of ideas to fix this. Thankfully, Hoenn doesn't suffer from the same problems that its predecessors did, half of the time, but it did decide to develop an entirely new issue that is specific to this region. Absolute madness. Anyway, we are nearing the end of the review with only 3 more categories to cover, so let's get to it, shall we? Gym Leaders, Elite 4, and Trainer Classes. The Gym Leaders, Elite 4, and Trainer Classes of Hoenn just might be the best we've seen yet. Let's start by discussing the Gym Leaders. Gym Leaders. In my opinion, the Gym Leaders of Hoenn, along with their teams, do an overall wonderful job of representing Hoenn. In Ruby and Sapphire, some of their teams are a little lackluster, but thankfully Emerald remedied that situation. And remember, version-exclusive content doesn't really matter. The entire generation gets credit for what the generation provided, so Emerald certainly assisted Hoenn's gym leaders in evading some scrutiny in that area. I do have a slight issue with Oris, but we'll get there. Let's break down these gym leaders. Roxanne is the gym leader of Rustboro City, and she battles with her rock types. And she rocks. She's Roxanne. Okay, I'll stop. But her placement here is so fitting. Rustboro is also home to the Devon Corporation, and Mr. Stone and his son Stephen Stone are also very interested in studying and collecting rare rocks. Roxanne is actually a student at the local trainer school, and she's got a thing or two to teach those who decided to choose Torchic as their starter. She battles alongside a Geodude and her ace Nosepass. In Emerald, she uses 2 Geodude instead of just 1. Interestingly, Nosepass can only be caught in Granite Cave by using the HM for Rock Smash. I love the continuity here. Brawly is the fighting-type gym leader of Dewford Town. I'm not 100% sure why his gym specifically is located in Dewford, other than Game Freak needing to have something going on in this town. But I guess since Brawly enjoys surfing, and surfing is a sport, and sports require you to work out, and I guess boxing is a form of working out, so that's my long-winded way of making sense of Brawly's location. It's fine, I guess. He uses a team composed of a Machop and a Makuhita, likely caught in Granite Cave north of Dewford Town. In Emerald, he also uses a Metatite on his team. I like Brawly and I like his team, and his location is fine, but did you know that in the older games you can totally accidentally skip over his gym entirely? As soon as you hand the letter to Stephen Stone, Mr. Briny will give the player the option to be ferried straight to Slateport Beach without ever even having to face Brawly. This kinda seems like an oversight on Game Freak's part, but thankfully I never forgot to get the gym badge from this town, though I could totally see why some may have inadvertently skipped over this gym. Next up is Watson, the electric-type gym leader of the Mauville City Gym. He's really one of the only gym leaders with a team that I take an issue with. In Ruby, Sapphire, and Oris, he uses a team of Magnemite, Voltorb, and a Magneton. Hoenn only introduced 4 new electric types, being Electrike, its evolution Manectric, Plusle, and Minun. Though I'm not sure why Game Freak decided that he should only use Kanto Pokemon. I mean, I understand that it's supposed to indicate that he got his Pokemon from New Mauville, the power plant south of the city, which is cool, I'm down with that. But I'm not down with him not having any of the 4 newly introduced electric mons for Hoenn Pokemon representation, especially when Electrike, Plusle, and Minun can all be found on Route 110 south of Mauville. I mean, they're literally right there. And Watson's jolly disposition leads me to believe that he'd probably enjoy having the cheerful Pika clones join him in battle. Though I could see Game Freak not wanting to include them on his team, since they're really better off being used in double battles. So in essence, I think his teams for those games could be better. Like his Emerald team, where he uses a Voltorb, an Electrike, a Magneton, and a Manectric. See, now he's got the best of both worlds, Pokemon from New Mauville and Hoenn Pokemon representation. Next in line is our fiery girl Flannery, who is the Fire-type gym leader of Lava Ridge. I love Flannery so much. I don't know why, but when I was a kid, I really resonated with her, and I always thought her hairstyle and outfit were super cute. Her team varies quite a bit depending on the games you're playing. In Ruby and Sapphire, her team is pretty sad with 2 weak-ass Slugma and her powerhouse ace Torkoal. I swear, Torkoal carried her team in those games. In Oris, they just swapped one of the Slugma for a Numel. But her Emerald team, once again, takes the cake. In this game, she's got a team of Slugma, Numel, Camerupt, and Torkoal. The additional Camerupt makes a huge difference to the difficulty of this team, especially if you don't have a viable ground or water type with you by this point. Congrats to those who chose Mudkip as their starter, you're gonna be just fine. Either way, I love her can-do attitude juxtaposed to her need to live up to the expectations of greatness that her grandfather set forth, and she's a fantastic inclusion here in Hoenn, especially in Lava Ridge where she is perfectly situated. The final gym leader that you'll face on this side of Hoenn is Big Daddy Norman, the normal-type gym leader of Petalburg City. His typing is perfect. Just a normal dad, working a not-so-normal job, but using normal-type Pokemon in this normal-ass city. He generally uses a team of 2 Slacking and a Vigoroth. However, I like his team better from Emerald, where he has a Vigoroth, his Ace Slacking, along with a Spinda and a Belly Drumming Linoon. I don't generally get into the gameplay aspects of the games unless they pertain to the region itself, but I couldn't help but recognize that Emerald just makes battling against the gym leaders more challenging, and fun for that matter. Next up is Winona, the flying-type gym leader of the Fortree City Gym. You just couldn't ask for a more perfect placement of this feathered female flying fighter. Fortree is literally fantastic for her. She typically uses a team consisting of Swellow, Pelipper, Skarmory, and her ace, Altaria. In Emerald, her team is a little wonky wonk. She added a Tropius to her team, which is fitting since her gym is located in the rainforest, the only place where Tropius can be found in the region. However, she seems to have swapped out her Swellow for a Swablu, and I'm not really a big fan of this change. I wish she would have just kept the Swellow. If anything should have been removed, it should have been the Pelipper, as they're so common in the region, we could have done without the extra representation of them here. This may be the one situation where I prefer her other teams over her Emerald one. Winona is still awesome though, and I still love her. Tate and Liza are the Psychic-type gym leaders of Moss Deep City. This is the first gym in the series where the player will engage in double battles, which already makes these twins quite interesting. I initially was kind of wondering why they were located in Moss Deep until I remembered their teams. The most important structure in this city is the Moss Deep Space Center. I know psychic themes are commonly associated with space to a certain degree, but their teams of Soul Rock and Lunatone really seal the deal for me. Soul Rock is based on the sun, while Lunatone is based on the moon. Both of these Pokemon are rumored to be relatively new species that were recently discovered and are rumored to have fallen from space. Lunatone specifically was said to have been found where a meteorite had struck the region. Makes sense why they're located in Meteor Falls if you ask me. It also makes sense why these two are the ace Pokemon of the Psychic-type gym leaders here in Moss Deep City. Once again, another perfect placement for these twins. I also really enjoy the addition of Xatu and Claydol on their Emerald teams. These Pokemon create this unique contrast of futuristic and ancient themes with Tate and Liza's team. I like it a lot. The final gym leader will depend on which version of the games you're playing. If you're playing Ruby, Sapphire, or Oris, you'll be challenging the Water-type gym leader Wallace in Sootopolis City. His team consists of Luvdisc, Whiscash, Celio, Seeking, and his ace Milotic. In Emerald, the final gym leader you'll face off against will be Juan, who uses Water types. His team is made up of Luvdisc, his ace Kingdra, Celio, Crawdaunt, and Whiscash. While I like that Emerald gives you the opportunity to fight against a different gym leader from the previous games and their remakes, I'm not sure that they changed his team in an advantageous way like they did with the other gym leaders. As a matter of fact, while I like Wallace's team for the most part, his and Wallace's team kind of suffer from the exact same issues. Number one, why do the 8th and final gym leaders in the region both have a weak little Luvdisc on their teams? I'm sure there's an explanation for this somewhere in the games, but I'm not sure it's a good one. Personally, I don't think this Pokemon belongs on what is supposed to be the strongest team prior to the Elite Four. I mean, it's quite cute, but I wouldn't say it fits either of their elegant themes either. Either way, even if we leave this adorable weakling on their teams, I still don't understand why they both have a Celio as opposed to a Walrein. Wallace has a Celio at level 44 on his team. Do you know what level Celio evolves into Walrein? Yeah, level 44. This makes literally 0 sense, and I hate it. Juan isn't really in any better position to justify his Celio either, as it's just at level 43. Literally all he had to do was level it up once and he's got a badass Walrein to sport on his roster. You know, as long as he didn't prevent it from evolving like Wallace did. I don't know. I have problems with these teams that I do intend to repair. Otherwise, these fellas are a great fit for Sootopolis City, and I enjoy their elegant inclusion quite a bit, especially Juan. Apparently, Wallace used to be an apprentice of his, and Juan actually used to be the resident gym leader of Sootopolis. However, after a while, he decided to step down as gym leader and entrusted his duties to his student. But eventually, Wallace became the reigning champion of the region in Emerald, and once he obtained this new position, Juan resumed his role as gym leader in Sootopolis. I love the additional lore here. It's so interesting. Maybe that's why they both have a Luvdisc on their team? That might explain it, but that doesn't excuse it. Anyway, I love Juan as the gym leader here, and Wallace is a wonderful fit as well. And that covers all of the gym leaders. Let's move on to the next subcategory. Elite Four. Just like in the Johto region review, the Elite Four subcategory will also include the champion, and I just decided to keep it a little less wordy. Anyway, the Elite Four and Champion of Hoenn are pretty awesome, and their teams are jam-packed with Hoenn Pokemon representation. The first Elite Four member you'll face off with is Sydney. This Aussie boss uses Dark-type Pokemon, and his team is about as good as it gets for Hoenn Mons. He uses a Mightyena, Shiftry, Cacturne, Sharpedo, and his ace Absol. In Emerald, he swaps out his Sharpedo for a Crawdaunt, but both of them are fantastic for his team, and I like them equally for him. Sydney is the quintessential representation of a perfect Elite Four member. He uses a team of exclusively Hoenn Pokemon with no repeats. All of them are true Dark types, and all are either single stage or fully evolved baddies that give you a taste of everything Hoenn offers. From the desert to the ocean, from the grasslands to the rainforest, Sydney has traveled far and wide to craft his perfect team. I absolutely love it. He truly represents the best of the best with his typing here in Hoenn. Next up is Phoebe, the Ghost-type Elite Four member. While I absolutely adore this phantom-loving island queen, her team is particularly lackluster in the Gen 3 games. She's got 2 Dusclops, 2 Bayonet, and a Sableye, and that's about as good as it's gonna get for her. The Hoenn games only introduced 3 Ghost-type evolutionary lines, and they're all included on her team. I guess I don't have a whole lot to complain about, but I'm just not a fan of repeat Pokemon on an Elite Four member's team. I believe I have the perfect solution for this issue that I'll cover in the region repair, and Phoebe is just so cute, and I feel bad for her that her team is kinda meh. That is, unless you're playing the Gen 6 games, where she actually evolved one of her Dusclops into a Dusknoir. In this case, her team is kinda passable. She still has a repeat Bayonet, but that's easy to fix. Just swap it out with a Shedinja, and boom, problem solved. Phoebe will unfortunately still be subject for a repair. The third Elite Four member on the Hoenn roster is Galatia, the Ice-type specialist. She suffers from the same issue that Phoebe suffers from, as she only has 2 Ice-type evolutionary lines to choose from in Hoenn, leaving her with a full team of repeats. In Gen 3, she's got 2 over-leveled Celio, 2 Glalie, and a Walrein. If you thought this issue was resolved in Oris, then you'd be mistaken. She did evolve her Snorunt into Frostlass in Oris, but all she did was swap out her 2 Celio for 2 Frostlass. So now she's got 4 Pokemon of the same evolutionary line, but maintained her 1 Walrein. I'm not sure that the Ice type was a good representation for the best of Hoenn. I mean, they're only available in a single cave in the games, and Snorunt specifically can only be found in 1 room in Shoal Cave. Sure, you could say she's one of the best explorers in Hoenn, but I wouldn't say she's the best in terms of battle prowess with her limited options. The fourth and final Elite Four member of Hoenn would be the Dragon-type dude Drake. He and Mr. Briny actually used to be shipmates. That's right, these two go way back. Anyway, his team varies depending on which games you're playing. In Ruby and Sapphire, his team consists of a Shelgon, an Altaria, 2 Flygon, and his ace Salamence. In Emerald, he swaps out one of his Flygon for a Kingdra, absolutely fantastic replacement if you ask me, and in Oris, he actually keeps the 2 Flygon and the Kingdra but removes the Shelgon. The fact that he has some repeats here isn't the best, but it isn't the worst either. I think I prefer his Oris team the best. I don't really like the repeat Flygon, but it beats having an unevolved member of his Ace's evolutionary line. And Flygon is quite versatile, I suppose. I would change it if I could, but honestly, he is utilizing every single fully evolved dragon type in the region, so I don't feel I have way too much to complain about here. Honestly, both him and his teams are kinda badass. Once the player has defeated each of the Elite Four members, they'll be taken to the regional champion, and in Hoenn, that would be the amazingly handsome Steel-type expert Steven Stone. His team is composed of a Skarmory, Claydol, Aggron, Cradily, Armaldo, and his formidable ace Metagross. What a banger of a Hoenn team! Like Sydney, Steven Stone exemplifies what it means to be a perfect champion. He's traveled the region far and wide, from the site of Mount Chimney's soot-covered fields to the arid desert where fossils lie in wait for revival, to the depths of Granite Cave, and even to a place where he obtained arguably one of the rarest Pokemon in all of Hoenn, his Metagross. You can't find Beldum in the wild anywhere in the region. In fact, the player can only obtain one from the champion himself. What an absolute stud. His unique team of Pokemon that all make sense for him as a character are skillfully chosen, making Steven Stone one of the best champions of all time in my book. Whether or not you find him challenging to battle against is another story. That's not really the focus of this review. Steven Stone has a strong connection to Hoenn itself, even being the son of the president of the Devon Corporation. He's a total badass and makes for a perfect champion, in my opinion. On the other hand, Wallace reigns over the region of Hoenn as champion in Pokemon Emerald. His team is made up of Wailord, his ace Milotic, Tentacruel, Ludicolo, Gyarados, and Whiscash. And honestly, his team is just as solid. He's got diverse team members, Hoenn representation, a strong connection to the region, and even used to be a gym leader. Though I'm not sure that I like him for champion as much as I prefer Steven Stone. The champion of the region doesn't have to be pigeonholed into a single typing like the gym leaders or Elite Four, and Wallace doesn't take advantage of that by using a team of exclusively water types. Not to mention, Juan is already a water-type gym leader, and we really didn't need two water-type enthusiasts to dominate the region. I mean, I understand that water is very prevalent in Hoenn, but I've seen enough water-type Pokemon by the time I've reached the champion. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve his title, but I would have preferred to see his team full of elegant Pokemon of different typings than what he has now. Steven Stone is still the best, but Wallace really isn't too bad either. I suppose I should also cover him in the region repair video. All in all, solid champion either way. Well, alrighty then, that covers the Elite Four and Champion. Let's move on to the final subcategory. Trainer classes. Trainer classes should be an indication of the type of people found in any given region and should indicate or add to the culture within its borders. Just like the previous region reviews, I won't be covering every trainer class in the region. Classes like fishers, hikers, lads, and lasses will pretty much be par for the course in any region. I only want to talk about the trainer classes that I think represent the region really well or don't really fit in here at all. And good news! I don't think any of the trainer classes in Hoenn are a poor fit for the region. Maybe you could argue that the Street Thug and Delinquent classes introduced in Gen 6 aren't the best fit, because there doesn't really seem to be too much crime here outside of Team Aqua or Team Magma. I don't think they're a bad fit personally, I guess. Instead, what we got in Hoenn is a litany of trainer classes that exemplify the culture of the locals. The standouts amongst the trainer classes would be the Parasol Lady, Ruin Maniac, Triathlete, and Interviewer introduced in Gen 3, and the Freediver and Scuba Diver in Gen 6. Hoenn marks the initial introduction of weather mechanics in the Pokemon series. This is what makes the inclusion of the Parasol Lady Trainer class such a great one for this region. These young women are typically seen carrying a parasol or umbrella and wear raincoats or rain dresses along with rain boots. In addition, they tend to utilize weather moves like Rain Dance. These ladies are a fantastic addition to the trainer class roster because they not only personify the inclusion of the weather systems, but also pose an interesting new challenge with their use of weather moves, which were also introduced in Hoenn. I love the fact that the Parasol Lady was created for the region, as they're a really perfect fit. Next up, I want to discuss the Ruin Maniac. These explorers can be seen predominantly in the archaeological places of interest around Hoenn. More specifically, they tend to be located in areas near the Regi caves like Ancient Tomb, Island Cave, Desert Ruins, and even inside the abandoned ship. I also think the aesthetics of this trainer class pair really well with Hoenn's introduction of new biomes like the desert, for example. I really appreciate their inclusion in these games because you know there's something important to seek out wherever they can be found. Fantastic addition to the roster, if you ask me. Another notable trainer class here in Hoenn would be the triathlete. This trainer class depicts both men and women dressed in athletic clothing and either jogging, biking, or swimming. The reason that this trainer class fits Hoenn so well is that half of the region is made of landmass and the other half is ocean. It makes so much sense to me to see athletes that are training on both land and in the sea. They aren't your typical bikers or swimmers. These are folks who train across the entire region and make use of its two halves. I think they fit Hoenn's geographical themes particularly well. The final trainer class from Gen 3 that I'd like to discuss would be the Interviewers. This unique duo demonstrates the new double battle system introduced in Hoenn, and they also hold a significance in the region because they work for the news stations in Hoenn and will even interview the player following a battle. If the player agrees to be interviewed, they will be featured on the news on TV. Isn't that interesting? They're the only trainer class in the games that play an active role in the cultural and social affairs of the region. An absolutely perfect addition to the trainer class roster here in Hoenn. Finally, I'd like to discuss the free divers and scuba divers introduced in Gen 6. They're the only trainer class that can be battled underwater, and this is actually a new feature as, in the Gen 3 games, there weren't any trainers in the underwater areas. The free divers are all female, whereas the scuba divers are all male. I don't understand why they couldn't just be combined into a single trainer class like the triathletes, but that's really just a nitpick. Either way, I really enjoy their inclusion in the games, especially since diving was introduced with Hoenn back in the Gen 3 days. I appreciate their homage to this mechanic. And that covers all of the trainer classes I wanted to mention. The gym leaders, Elite 4, and trainer classes are all pretty solid here in Hoenn. The gym leaders in particular do a wonderful job of personifying the culture of Hoenn, showing off the region's debut Pokemon, and they all fit into their respective cities and towns perfectly. Any issues that I may have had with their teams were generally fixed in Emerald, but unfortunately, Oris decided to go the way of the dodo and resort back to some of the lackluster teams of Ruby and Sapphire, though it did kind of fix a couple of teams. And while not every gym leader's team is perfect in Emerald, they sure are an improvement. The Elite 4 and Champion, on the other hand, aren't as good as the gym leaders, particularly Phoebe and Glacia. Their teams just contain too many repeat Pokemon, and their type choices make it difficult for me to agree that they make for good Elite 4 members. But I have some ideas as to how to fix these two. Drake is pretty good, but I think Sydney is the highlight of the Hoenn Elite 4. As far as the Champion is concerned, I already explained this earlier, but I really do prefer Steven Stone over Wallace in Emerald, though I don't think Wallace is a bad choice per se. He could use a little improvement, but I don't really have too many complaints with Wallace. The trainer classes of Hoenn are perfect! There are even more trainer classes that I really like that I didn't even mention because the ones I did mention are just so damn good. But I want to give a shout out to the Aroma Ladies, Ninja Boys, the Tubers, and the Secret Base Trainers. So, for the gym leaders, Elite 4, and trainer classes, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 4.5, Gen 6 a score of 4, resulting in Hoenn receiving an overall score of 4.25. The reason that Gen 3 scored higher than Gen 6 is pretty much due to Emerald improving upon the gym leaders' teams. I really don't like this idea of keeping the remakes so faithful to the original pair of games that it works to the newer game's detriment. For some reason, Game Freak likes to ignore the third or enhanced version of these games when remaking the older titles, and I really wish they would stop doing that. I understand that they still want to sell two versions of the same game side by side and retain their version-exclusive content, but I'm just not sure why Game Freak refuses to include the enhanced content of Emerald, like the Gym Leaders teams, the Battle Frontier, or Trainer Hill. I mean, maybe it's because they want to keep the games fairly easy for newcomers, but I just don't think that dumbing down the battles or reducing the challenge is a good idea. If I were a kid when these games came out and I played both the Gen 6 games and the Gen 3 games, I might find it fairly insulting that Game Freak assumed I was too stupid to learn how to battle strategically to overcome a challenge. That doesn't have anything to do with the Region of Hoenn, it's just something that I've noticed and thought I'd take a second to gripe about. Regardless, both the generations excel in this category. Hoenn stands out for having challenging gym leaders, presenting a compelling Elite Four and champion, and featuring trainer classes that effectively capture the culture and essence of the Hoenn locals. This region definitely deserves its awesome score of 4.25 for this category. All right, let's keep on trucking, shall we? Naturally occurring phenomena. As an introduction to this category, I'm simply going to repeat what I've said in previous region reviews. Naturally occurring phenomena refers to processes that would occur in nature, like weather, a day-night cycle, seasons, and established days of the week. Scoring this category is pretty straightforward. These mechanics were either included in the games or they weren't. Pretty simple. Achieving a perfect score in this category won't be easy for any region unless all mechanics were present and serve a purpose. And weather has to exist in the overworld, not just in battle, in order for the region to get credit for it. Of course, we can extrapolate that regions have time, seasons, and weather, even though we may not see them in game, but you know the saying, folks. If you cannot experience it while you are in the region itself, then the region doesn't get points for it. That being said, Hoenn is kinda lacking in this category. In Gen 3, there are no seasons, no day-night cycle, and no established days of the week. However, as stated previously, the Gen 3 games did introduce weather mechanics to the series. You can now experience a litany of different weather conditions throughout your playthrough of Hoenn, and rain isn't the only one either. As a matter of fact, wind plays a very important part here in Hoenn, as there is a constant sandstorm occurring in the desert on Route 111. Even Route 113 in the northern part of Jagged Pass experience soot that is perpetually falling from the peak of Mount Chimney, which kind of feels like snow, but it actually has to do with Hoenn's wind patterns. It's pretty much always raining on routes 119 and 123, but every 4 days the skies will be clear and sunny. However, Route 119 will occasionally experience thunderstorms with heavier rains and even lightning. However, Route 120 contains perpetual rainfall in some of the sections of the route where it never stops. The interesting thing about the weather systems introduced in Hoenn is that when Kyogre or Groudon wake from their slumber, they'll introduce either a severe thunderstorm or harsh sunlight, respectively. There is also fog at Mount Pyre and inside the Cave of Origin, and even the Lava Ridge Gym, though it could potentially be steam in the latter locations. All of the weather conditions that were introduced in Gen 3 were carried over to the Gen 6 games, so now you can experience weather in 3D. If you wanted to. I don't know. I don't use the 3D function. The odd thing about Hoenn is the fact that time is kinda strange here. But don't get me started on the Gen 3 cartridge's internal battery issues that dictated time in RSC. That doesn't pertain to Hoenn itself. That is specifically a hardware situation, and I won't be covering it in this review. Now, time does exist in Gen 3, but its functionality is extremely limited. The player sets the time via the analog clock in their bedroom at the very beginning of the game, and it's the only way that the player can check the time after that. Time in Gen 3 only serves to dictate the growth of berries, the tides at Shoal Cave, and give the player the ability to evolve their Eevee into either an Espeon between the hours of 12 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. or Umbreon between the hours of 12 a.m. to 11:59 a.m. The tides at Shoal Cave change every 6 hours. For example, high tide starts at 9 a.m. and shifts to low tide at 3 p.m., which shifts back into high tide at 9 p.m., and so on. You'll need to keep an eye on the tidal changes that occur in this cave if you wish to get your hands on a Snorunt and the Shell Bell. The other odd thing about Gen 3 Hoenn is that there aren't days of the week, but the internal clock does recognize when the day changes. However, this feature also has limited utility, as it really only functions for changing the Lily Cove department store's daily lottery, enabling the man in Pacific Town to assess the accessibility of Mirage Island each day, as well as determining when specific NPCs around the region will hand out more berries. In Gen 6, the time of day was no longer reliant on the internal battery of the cartridge, but rather the time set on the 3DS. In Oris, there is a day-night cycle, but it's almost exclusively for aesthetic purposes. Time in these games performs all of the same functions that it does in RSC, except now it's just visually apparent. While Hoenn does feel amazing with the aesthetic touch of time, Oris expanded the time functionality beyond its predecessors. Time now plays a more important role, specifically with respect to the legendary Pokemon found in the Mirage spots discussed in the Exploratory Incentives category. The legendary beasts rotate out every 20 minutes. The Lake Trio appears depending on the time of day. For example, Mesprit appears between 9 p.m. and 3:59 a.m., Azelf appears between 4 a.m. and 7:59 p.m., and poor little Uxie only appears for about an hour between 8 p.m. and 8:59 p.m. But guess what? Oris also included days of the week, because Cobalion appears on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, Terrakion appears on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Virizion appears on Mondays and Thursdays. But that's not all. The clearance sale on the rooftop of the Lily Cove department store occurs every Saturday as well. Those two occurrences are really the only function that the days of the week serve, but that's at least something, right? In Gen 6, alongside the Gen 3 daily changes, you can acquire honey from an NPC in Fall Arbor once a day, give your Pokemon a daily massage to boost its happiness, participate in inverse and rotation battles in Mauville City, and engage in a daily battle with 5 different opponents at the Battle Resort. It seems like the Hoenn experience has been improved in Gen 6, and I really appreciate the new additions that came along with the updated time mechanics. So, for naturally occurring phenomena, I'm giving Gen 3 a score of 2.5, Gen 6 a score of 4, resulting in Hoenn receiving an overall score of 3.25. Gen 3 got about the best score it can get in this category. The introduction of weather in these games was so substantial and impactful to the series as a whole. Time does serve a small function, but I wouldn't exactly call it a day-night cycle, so it was given a half point for that. In Gen 6, the day-night cycle does exist, but it simply doesn't serve much of a purpose in the grand scheme of things. However, it does make the games feel slightly more immersive, and that's still an appreciated inclusion. The days of the week in Hoenn also have limited impact, mostly affecting encounters, with 3 legendary Pokemon and triggering the Lily Cove rooftop sale on Saturdays. Beyond that, not much changes based on the specific day. I think Game Freak kind of missed an opportunity to make weekdays more meaningful. Think back to the days of the Johto games and everything that was included to make it apparent that the days of the week actually matter to the people of the region and have an effect on the region itself. Time definitely does affect Hoenn, specifically in Shoal Cave. It's just not as impactful as it was in Johto. But still, in Oris, players can take advantage of daily tasks that reset with each new day, highlighting the changing of the days rather than their weekly significance. And since Hoenn doesn't have any seasons or seasonal areas, I decided to give Gen 6 an almost perfect score of 4. But it certainly deserves it by giving significance to time. It doesn't do it as well as Johto, but it certainly does it better than the Gen 3 games. So good for you, Oris. We appreciate you round these parts. Anyway, let's move on to the final category of the review. Music and sound design. If I could use a single word to describe the music from Hoenn, it would be triumphant. The melodies of the Gen 3 games were beautifully remade in Oris, in all of their orchestral glory. And when music has the power to influence the way we interpret our experiences, it sure becomes apparent that the soundtrack of Hoenn is cheering you on and compelling you to seek grand exploration during your venture. As a matter of fact, Hoenn does a great job at exemplifying these elements. The music in early game areas such as Little Root and Oldale Town, as well as the initial routes like 101, 102, and 103, doesn't immediately bombard you with trumpets and French horns. Instead, these tunes are simple, calming, and enjoyable. They encourage a sense of wonder and curiosity in this new and exciting place. Once the player reaches Petalburg City, the music really starts ramping up the excitement a little bit with a cheerful, upbeat, and lively tune. The Petalburg Woods might be the first time that the player encounters a sense of unease and caution. Route 104 is the first of the routes to really bring in those trumpets that march alongside you as you truly embark on your adventurous journey. And that's really what the music of the routes of Hoenn represent. Adventure. Trumpets, French horns, tubas, flutes, crashing cymbals, and powerful string instruments follow behind you like a marching band, encouraging you to press on no matter the challenge. But not every single location has powerful melodies like those of the routes. Some routes have particularly unique tunes, like on Route 113, where you can almost hear the soot fluttering down from Mount Chimney. The melody is subtle yet mysterious and leaves you with a sense of curiosity as you navigate the route. The underwater areas capture a muffled underwater characteristic, incorporating subtle tones and even bubbles. Meteor Falls and the Cave of Origin both exude this mystical and cautious feel, but with a sense of wonder, like there's more to these caves than meets the eye. The music inside Mount Pyre is haunting and somber, while the music at Mount Pyre's peak feels both airy yet daunting and ancient and trails into this amazing yet mysterious theme. The music in Hoenn is so expertly composed that it allows listeners to almost feel the environments it portrays. The compositions vividly capture elements like soot drifting through the air, cascading notes resembling waterfalls, the atmospheric fog, the player's resolute journey through the routes, and the muffled experience of being underwater. These diverse and dynamic melodies truly bring the various facets of the Hoenn region to life. This is what I mean when I say that Hoenn's music is all about adventure, because it implores you to not just rush through to the next area. The music entices you to explore as if the place you're in right now is your destination. That is, until you reach the safe havens of the cities and towns, where the music slows down a little bit and recommends that the player rest for a while and enjoy their stay, especially in locations like Rustboro, Mauville, and Moss Deep City, with their calming bossa nova influence. Dewford Town would love for you to stay forever on this sleepy island where the music is as gentle as the warm ocean breeze. Slateport is sounding bells of enthusiasm as you shop through the marketplace and explore this bustling city. But nothing is more comforting during your journey through Hoenn than feeling safe and relaxed when you step foot into Verdanturf Town, with its fresh green grass and its pure clean air, as the music that plays here invites you to stay a while in the countryside. Same thing goes with Fall Arbor Town and its cheerful and reassuring lullaby. The secret base theme, along with Fortress City, evokes a simple and joyful ambiance reminiscent of a warm summer evening. The Fortress City theme always gets stuck in my head because it's just so damn catchy. Then you've got Lily Cove City, where you can almost hear the tide rushing up and down the shore of the city, while the music sways up and down the scale. The music of Sutopolis City feels calm and majestic, capturing the unique atmosphere of this city and has an uplifting tone. It's one of my favorite songs from the Pokemon games. Lastly, there's Evergrande City, and the music that plays here almost sounds like a quiet finale, indicating to the player that they've reached the final frontier of their journey. While you're in Hoenn, the music might make you feel this sense of push and pull. The routes pushing you forward through your journey, and the towns and cities in unique locations pulling you in to stay and explore a while. It's like a roller coaster ride of bombastic excitement juxtaposed with relaxing, wholesome, and joyful tones that feel as diverse and inspiring as the adventure itself. I would even go so far as to say that the music of Hoenn defines the adventure here, and you're likely to leave these games with at least one tune stuck in your head. So, for music and sound design, I'm giving Gen 3, Gen 6, and Hoenn overall an absolutely chef's kiss perfect score of 5 across the board. The music of Hoenn just stays with me, you know? Like an old friend, like a fresh new start, like an encouraging teammate, like a perilous headspace, like a relaxing summer morning, like the backdrop to a lifetime of experiences. I love Hoenn's music, and I will unironically listen to its OST for no reason at all, but just to capture a feeling, an emotion, or just relive the excitement of my ventures through the Hoenn region. And when melodies just feel like they're woven into the fabric of your soul, they probably deserve some recognition for that. Well, that concludes the overview of Hoenn. What a wild ride. I love it. My voice is killing me right now. Anyway, after tallying up the scores for the categories of this review, Generation 3 comes out with a final score of 4.05. Generation 6 comes out with a final score of 4.35, resulting in the Hoenn region overall receiving a final score of 4.2. These scores seem pretty fitting to me. Hoenn is pretty awesome overall and is one of the better games in the series. It definitely deserves at least a score of 4 overall for sure. But these final scores kind of make my brain upsetty spaghetti, so how about we round these scores either up or down to a neat little 0.5 increments that make my brain go,
I can explain.
Gen 3, with its score of 4.05, can be rounded down to an even 4. I'm really not reducing much here at all, and that 0.05 isn't super impactful to its score. I really can't even find a justification for removing it other than maybe docking that tiny little piece of a point for its dated graphics, but even that's not a great justification because I honestly love the Gen 3 old school graphics. And the games run at 60 frames per second, so what's not to love? I'm kind of a sucker for that old school pixelated style, what can I say? I'm elderly. I don't know, the Gen 3 games graphics are kinda charming. Either way, I'm just going to round this score down to a nice little score of 4, and I think the Gen 3 games deserve this fantastic score, even though they came out over 20 years ago. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald still hold up to this day, and I still prefer to play them over Oris most of the time. And Oris, with its odd score of 4.35, can be rounded up by 0.15 to a neat little score of 4.5. If anything, these games do deserve the tiny little boost for the graphical improvements and interesting new areas that look really awesome for the 3DS. Seriously, Hoenn has just a little more flavor with the new graphics, and I appreciate Game Freak making some changes to the old formula so that this graphical update can truly be appreciated. And finally, Hoenn overall, with its score of 4.2, could be rounded up to a fantastic score of 4.5. Sure, that's not how numbers work. I know that it should technically be rounded down, but I just think that Hoenn overall deserves greatness. It's such an amazing and memorable region. Hoenn introduced the Pokemon world to biomes, weather, growing berries, 2 different bikes for different traversal styles, tidal shifts, deep sea diving, beautiful and diverse music, and some of the most iconic Pokemon to date. For all of these reasons, I think Hoenn overall definitely deserves a score of 4.5. But that's all just unofficial bonus mumbo jumbo. You take your pick of which scores you like for your own headcanon. If you like the original wonky scores, you're welcome to stand by them, and if you like my rounded scores, you're welcome to accept them too. All in all, Hoenn as a region is a triumphant adventure. Hoenn feels like the first fully fleshed out region in the Pokemon series, and it marked a major turning point for region design moving forward. Not a single place in Hoenn is untouched by its themes of balance, harmony, karma, and coexistence between people, Pokemon, and Mother Nature. You can find yourself stopping your journey multiple times to check out all of the amazing sights, places, and landmarks carved into the land and the ocean. Time-worn legends of creation and destruction illustrate the history and the culture of this place. Primordial beasts wielding immense power shaped these lands in ancient times, establishing the very principles that govern the delicate balance of nature. Hoenn implores you to be mindful of your footprint, so that you should never endanger the Pokemon or the sanctity of this beloved region, so that its environments may remain in tranquility until nature itself deems it worthy of change. And although Hoenn would ask that you respect its bounty, it yearns for you to explore its secrets, leisurely bask in its safe and comfortable settlements, learn its teachings of karmic consequences, and take in every single breathtaking vista that was carefully crafted to appeal to your senses. The grasslands and fresh air of verdant turf, the bubbling and boiling lava of Mount Chimney, the soot-covered fields of Route 113, the vibrant rainforests of Route 119 and 120, the foggy and mystical peak of Mount Pyre, and the vast and glorious ocean of Hoenn are all waiting for your arrival and begging for your recognition. You come to this place with excitement in your heart and adventure in your soul. You leave this place with a newfound appreciation for the land you walk upon, with a sense of fulfillment, and with the knowledge that the journey itself has no destination. The destination is the present moment, right here in this place. In every place you've been, during every second you've been there, and your destination has been dynamic ever since you first stepped foot into Hoenn. Welcome to Abundance, Trainer. Enjoy your adventure. Well, this concludes my Hoenn region review. What did y'all think about it? Be sure to leave me your comments below. I can't wait to hear y'all's opinions. What did you think about the length of the video? I think I'm gonna keep doing the region reviews this way. I had a lot of fun with this review. Hoenn is one of my absolute favorite regions, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Anyway, if you liked the video, please don't forget to leave me a like. It really does help boost me in the algorithm. And if you think other people would enjoy my region reviews too, then liking this video will help push it out to them. And if you want to see more content like this from me, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a region review, as I do upload randomly. Before I end this video, I want to give a special thank you to Silk Touch Ninja for supporting the channel. Your consistent support has always been very appreciated, so I just want to make sure that you were recognized here. Thank you. And if you would like to monetarily support the channel, you can absolutely leave me a super thanks on my videos, or you can earn your Marsh badge today by becoming a member of the channel. That is right, I now have a membership program for all of you. It's just one tier, it's $4 a month. What you get is you get a little badge next to your name indicating that you are a member. You will get video status updates during production. You will get early access to new videos at least 24 hours in advance. You'll have your YouTube handle shouted out at the end of my videos, just like Silk Touch Ninja did today. And you will have priority reply to comments. So if you'd like to support the channel and you would also like to get some extra benefits by doing so, you can join the membership program and earn your Marsh badge today. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed and supported my channel with your time and attention. I've reached my goal of 5K not too long ago, and I couldn't do it without y'all. Let's see if we can turn that into 10K as my next goal. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see y'all in the rankings of the cities and towns and in the Hoenn Region Repair. See ya then. Bye!